This talk is by me and Christine House. So we're not really answering the questions about whether robots can talk or not, but we're suggesting ways in which they should be able to talk to be more useful to us. And we're trying to present some ideas we have about how to get there. So the title of our talk is There's Not a Reason Why. And that's actually from a poem about called the Charge of the Light Brigade, about a brigade of soldiers that are basically sent to their death without questioning the motives behind this. So it's sort of a poem about bravery. However, today, when we use artificial intelligence for a lot of safety tasks, we don't want to be like the Light Brigade. We don't want to not being able to question the motives of the artificial agents to give us the instructions that they do, or suggest the solutions that they suggest, etc. And the idea that a lot of people have about AI and robots is actually very close to a type of conversation where we can do this. And this is very much like the picture that we get from science fiction, for example. I mean, already quite a long time ago in 2001: A Space Odyssey, we have conversations like this with human and computer.
Open the pod bay doors, Hal.
I'm sorry, Dave. I'm afraid I can't do that.
What's the problem?
I think you know what the problem is just as well as I do.
What are you talking about, Hal?
This mission is too important for me to allow you to jeopardize it.
I don't know what you're talking about, Hal.
I know that you and Frank were planning to disconnect me, and I'm afraid that's something I cannot allow to happen.
Yeah, so what we see here is that Dave gives instruction to Hal, and Hal refuses, and then Dave inquires about his reasons for, or the computer's reason for refusing, and then by like engaging in a sort of question-answer conversation, finally Hal says that it is because he doesn't want to be disconnected. So this is kind of the idea that a lot of people have about how interaction with artificial agents work. But actually, if we look at some of the basically the best artificial agents that are around, things like Siri, Amazon, and Alexa, the kind of interaction that we have is actually very far removed from this ideal. So this is an example of a short exchange with Siri.
How old is Joe Biden?
Joe Biden is 78 years old.
How old is Donald Trump?
Donald Trump is 74 years old.
Who is older?
Here's some information.
Who is older, Joe Biden or Donald Trump?
Here's what I found.
Yeah, so here we see that the user asks, how old is Joe Biden? Siri responds, and then how old is Donald Trump? Siri responds. But then even a fairly simple reasoning task as saying, out of the information that the system has access to, answering the question, who is older, it can't do that. And I mean, that is like a lot simpler than the types of reasoning tasks that are involved in responding to why questions, as in the previous example. So one thing that's interesting here is that even though the research and then the technological advancements that has happened in recent years that are used by artificial intelligence does not seem to take account of insights that have been made in the way that humans actually interact in psychology and linguistics, cognitive science, for example. So what we want to do is we want to focus on how human reasoning can be modeled in order to improve the capability of artificial agents to be able to communicate with humans in a way that's like easily accessible to humans. So that means providing answers that are not only correct, I mean truthful, but also sensible and useful in a given context. And this is like a very important aspect of the whole explainability for AI problem. So let's move on then to, just going to try to, let's move on then to an actual human dialogue. So this is an example from the British National Corpus of a dad, Dave, and his son, Lee. So Dave says, you're going to be home from football until 4, you'll have your dinner, want a bath. And Lee says, yeah, but I might not go to school tomorrow. Dave says, why? Because of my cough. How can you play football and not go to school then? Because I was going out in the fresh air. I'm all right when I'm out in the fresh air. So why aren't you going to school then? Well, I'm in a classroom all day, Dad. So this is clearly a discussion that uses a lot of inference. So, so things that we need in order to participate in this dialogue is knowledge about linguistic items used. We need to know like the behavior of the interlocutors in general. We need to have knowledge about the shared environment. And it's also very necessary for participants to have some sort of world knowledge, including social norms, cultural knowledge, etc. And these factors are usually considered to be outside the remit of linguistics proper. So world knowledge, for example, is not part of linguistics, even though it's clear that you do need world knowledge in order to interpret even like sort of more structural aspects of language in use. So, and all of these factors are really important in situated reasoning, which is the kind we have, of course, when we interact with artificial agents. So this is one example of an argument that is included in this dialogue. So Lee says, yeah, but I might not go to school tomorrow. Dave says, why? And Lee justifies this because of my cough. So clearly there is an argument here that is, I have a cough and therefore I will not go to school tomorrow. So even though that seems like a pretty reasonable argument, it's also very clear that it's not a logical argument. So in our analysis argument, we say that arguments like these are enthymematic. And this is a term that comes from classical rhetoric originally. The word enthymematic, it means that the argument relies in something that's in the mind of the interlocutor or audience. And these things in the mind, that could be facts, beliefs, principles of reasoning that warrant the acceptability of the argument. So, and these enthymematic arguments or enthymemes, they depend on context and background knowledge, beliefs, and they are often negotiable and defeasible. And if you think of a logical syllogism, it's not defeasible. It's like the conclusion necessarily follows from the premises. And this is not the case with enthymemes. And some of the knowledge that we need in order to interpret an enthymeme is available to us in the form of a topoi, or a topos, or several topoi. And these are principles of reasoning that warrant these non-logical arguments. And this concept comes like from Aristotle originally, but it's also been used in linguistics by people like Ducrot and Anscombe, for example. So, a system of topoi, contrary to rules in a logical system is not a monolithic system. And that means that several topoi can be acceptable in a given situation, and you can even have topoi available that actually lead to inconsistent conclusions when applied to the same situation. And topoi can range from very, very specific ideas, like birds can fly, for example. If something is a bird, then it can fly, to more universal things, like a topos that Aristotle calls the topos of the more and the less. And that topos is an example of that would be something like, if you can build a castle, you can build a cottage. So the idea is, if you can do X and X is bigger or harder or more advanced, etc., than Y, then you can also do Y. Another example would be, of course, you can run the Gothenburg half marathon, you ran the London marathon. And the topos there would be, if you can do X and X is longer, you can also do Y. However, so this is, I think, a topos that most of us intuitively feel to be a topos that we sort of live by. I mean, this is the types of justifications or explanations we give to things all the time. And in the marathon example, it's very, very, I mean, running half a marathon and running a marathon is exactly the same thing. So provided that they're in the same time frame, like, of course, if you ran the London marathon when you were 20 and you're now 80, it's not obvious that you can run a half marathon, but basically they're pretty comparable. However, it's not necessarily the case that just because you can build a castle, you can build a cottage, because there might be techniques involved that you don't, that are involved in building a cottage that are not involved in building a castle, etc. However, both of these seems pretty acceptable to use this topos. However, topoi are often used in contexts where we don't really agree with them, but we still need to recognize them in order to be able to interpret the discourse. So here's an example of this was from the 2016, the presidential race in the US. So Donald Trump retweeted something that someone had said about Hillary Clinton. So if Hillary Clinton can't satisfy her husband, what makes her think she can satisfy America? So this is clearly drawing on this topos of the more and the less. However, there are several things here that are clearly not acceptable logic, right? But we still need to understand the topos and recognize the topos in order to interpret the meaning of this, like how it's even coherent, to the extent that it is, I guess. Okay, so returning to our dialogue. So we remember the dialogue. Dave is talking to his son, and Lee, the son, is trying to justify why he can go and play football and still not go to school tomorrow. So the central argument or enthymeme from Dave's perspective, the father, is that Lee is ill and therefore he should stay at home. And this enthymeme could be underpinned by one of several available topoi. So one would be, if someone's ill and they need rest, then they should stay at home. Or if someone is ill and contagious, they should stay at home. And these are sort of two different approaches to this. And it seems like Dave draws on the topos in 6. Like, if you're ill, you need to take it easy, you need to stay at home. And then, of course, that excludes the football. Whereas in examples in this topos in 7, it's all about like not transferring the illness to someone else. And then, as we are all painfully aware nowadays, it's like less dangerous if you're out in the fresh air, right? So this shows how we can interpret utterances slightly differently, and also interpret their, or like value their, like how important they are in the context. differently depending on which topoi they evoke in us or which topoi we interpret them according to. And this may lead to misunderstanding, and it may also lead to disagreement. Thus, it's very important for artificial agents to be able to identify the topoi that they themselves use as like underpinning for conclusions it draws, and also for suggestions that it makes, or decisions it makes, for example, especially in like safety critical tasks such as like diagnosis of diseases and like self-driving cars, etc., etc. And this is important for the system to be able to answer questions about the decisions that it makes. So, for example, in the Hal and Dave dialogue, where Hal is able to answer questions that Dave puts about his reasons for not allowing a particular action. So the thing with human dialogue and the acquisition of these topoi is that what we as humans, we use a lot of, we have like a vast collection of topoi that we learn from infancy, basically. And they are topoi that relate to language, but they're also topoi that relate to like non-linguistic things, like the way the world works, etc. And we learn these through just interacting with the world, with the context, with other people, etc. So it's part of our experience, basically. And this is like problem for artificial agents, since they don't in the same way have access to, like they don't have experiences in the same way. So they can only relate to the data that it's been fed, basically. So what do we need for agents to acquire and use topoi? Well, we need to be able to identify topoi in data. And that seems quite possible for certain types of topoi, like more sort of fact-based ones. But we might also need to hard code them. Things like, for example, the more and the less topos is very hard to extract from data, since it's quite an abstract level. And therefore, we need to be able to describe topoi and the processes involved in manipulating topoi. And I mean, we might have a topos, like the more and the less topos. We are able to recognize that topos in a specific case that we've never heard before. And that's because we have these processes for sort of specifying a topos to fit a particular example. So we need to be able to describe the topos and the processes involved in a way that is like interpretable by a computer. So our approach combines different strands of research in linguistics, and they each contribute important perspective on interaction. And some of the research that we're currently doing, drawing on this idea of topoi, is work on incremental processing. We've looked at humor, how topoi are relevant in order to explain why some jokes are funny sometimes. We have also looked at social meaning and how that can be interpreted in terms of the topoi that are evoked in a conversation. And we have also looked at reasoning in dialogues involving patients with schizophrenia. And we have formalized topoi and processes involved in the use of topoi using dialogue game boards to keep track of the information states of agents involved in dialogue. And these are basically techniques from like dialogue modeling. And we formalize it using type theory with records, which is a formalism that has been successfully used for various dialogue phenomena. and it's also computationally tractable. So, in summary, this approach to reasoning and interaction that we are working on, it contributes to explainability. That means that it can enable artificial agents to justify their conclusions and decisions in a way that humans can understand. And it's generalizable. That means that it improves the ability of an agent to move seamlessly into a new domain. And this is a long-standing challenge in AI. So it means, for example, that if you like, a lot of the topoi are actually abstract enough to like cover several different domains, so you can use them and apply them in different domains. Yes, so that's it. Thank you.
Great. Thank you very much for that really interesting presentation. Great start to the day. I would suggest that we get into questions right away. If anyone has them already, I checked for the chat. There have not been any yet. We can like take about 10 to 15 minutes in terms of questions. We will be a little delayed, but as I said before, thanks to some cancellations, we are actually well equipped with time. I don't see any question just yet, which is why I would, nope, never mind. Marinas Ferreira, please go ahead.
Hi, I have a lot of questions really, but let's start with this one. Quite a lot of the really large language models, at least, make use of mainly statistical descriptions of language relationships. And as I'm sure you know, there's some debate about whether this can capture semantics at all, right? Like these models, in a very important sense, don't interpret the tokens in their databases at all. And we can see this in the debate in the conversational agent not being able to compare Trump and Biden's ages. It just doesn't have a domain of discourse, right? It's not tracking the items. It's not interpreting them at all. Doesn't your use of topoi, which I find hard enough to teach my undergraduate students, never mind computers, I'm marking stuff on this right now. That's what's on my head, top of my head. Doesn't this require interpreting the items that are being based with? So does that mean that at least at the moment, this couldn't be applied to the eye-catching, much publicized, very large statistical natural language processing models we have?
That might be true. I mean, the thing is that it's quite challenging even to get a sort of like little toy thing to work to some extent, right? But it does, I mean, it does seem like, I mean, and Chris can sort of support me here if I'm just saying something that's completely wrong, but it does seem like the way forward in general when it comes to tasks that involve more actual dialogue in AI and computational linguistics and NLP or whatever, is to combine statistical models and some more symbolic ones.
But I mean, in answer to your other question, it does require that you track the things that you're doing in dialogue. But I mean, we need those independently for other reasons anyway, for things like anaphora. So having no memory in a system doesn't make sense. But the problem is with most of the current systems is they don't do these things incrementally. And of course, if you're in a dialogue, everything is done incrementally. And I think part of the issue is that you can use things like knowledge graphs for quite a lot of the low-level topoi, which I think Ellen was kind of talking about, like birds flying. But it just doesn't work when you try and scale it up to these ones that kids know. Like my 2-year-old can answer questions about the fact he knows that when he drops his spoon, it falls to the floor, right? And when you drop any object, it's going to fall to the floor. Unless, you know, and that's just something that he knows as a topos that he can then use productively in a different situation. And those things are the things that are really difficult, I think, to teach a system. And I don't think the statistical models will get that. And I don't think it's the right way to go about it for some of these things, because actually it's just not how the world works. It's not how it, you know, it's not how humans acquire them, certainly. And whether that's something that we want to be emulating or not is, of course, a different thing. But I think just getting text and not having any of the interaction is problematic.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with all of this. This looks like another battle line between the pure statistical models and the linguists. And I just worry about the famous outburst of one of these people, I forget which one, but whenever he fires a linguist, his model becomes more accurate, right? So
yeah, but that's something that they said like 10 years ago, 20 years ago, or it's like a classic thing that some of the more computational and less linguistically inclined computational linguists tend to say, but it still seems like it's not really true anymore as much.
I don't know, these arguments come round and round. I mean, I was an undergraduate in AI in the 90s, and then the big thing was connectionist models. And of course, you know, then they went out of fashion and we went back to the sort of more rule-based stuff again. And then we went back to the, you know, the neural net models. And now we're talking more about hybrid models. They're the new kind of the current thing. But it's not that these, you know, I mean, I think that you need top-down processes and bottom-up processes. And it's just how we combine those that's actually, you know, we've not solved it.
Right. I would suggest that if you want to do the moderation, by all means, you can just pick the ones that I'm pretty sure the hand raising has now established as like a rule to go. So, yeah.
So, Eleni?
Hello, could I please just say regarding the previous question that it's not necessarily the case that only symbolic models can deal with the issue of topoi. I mean, you can detect the surface structure of a topos in an exchange with a GPT-3, for example. You can detect it in the behavior of the model. When you ask it a question, it gives you an answer. Underlyingly, you can detect that a kind of topos, maybe a very primitive one, not a very sophisticated one, has been employed. So these models can detect from textual data, which is what they are fed, various patterns, because topoi are patterns of reasoning. So they can be detected by current models as well. It's not necessarily the case that you have to have a semantic structure to abstract these patterns of reasoning. So I don't think that it is necessarily the case that for very primitive, very basic patterns of reasoning, we need the symbolic approach. Of course, if we wanted to behave as human as we would like it to behave, then we have the ability to abstract over levels and levels of linguistic sophistication and employ these more sophisticated patterns of reasoning. So,
can I just say something? That I think there's also a difference there that maybe what Eleni's saying is touched on, which is the difference between using a topos effectively and actually being able to talk about using that topos, right? Indeed. And these are completely different levels of abstraction. And again, maybe my 2-year-old doesn't know that's what he's doing, but he can use it in a way that makes sense. And similarly with these models.
If I may just quickly, of course, the statistical models find patterns all day long. They're spectacularly good at it. But my point was rather about, we care about the patterns between interpreted objects, and the statistical models find patterns between items in a database, like linguistic tokens. Yeah. And that bridge is the battle line that I was pointing towards. This seems like another battle line there.
Yeah, and I think that is partly an artifact of thinking about language in terms of these abstract symbols rather than as actions and processes, which is what these systems do, right? And actually, I don't think my 2-year-old does that again. Not that I keep mentioning him, but he is a very sophisticated language user. But and it's about the actions and the processes. It's not about these higher level mental representations or this relates to that and this. It's about what it does in the world, how it's used. And I think that difference is something that's really kind of crucial to what you're saying there, actually.
I just jumping in. I'm sorry for the background noise because there is a ship-based demonstration going on in Berlin right now where there's just honking without stop, but I hope you can still understand me. So I was wondering, similar to what has been discussed before, but also maybe more from a semantic point of view, where topoi are as like a rule of thumb for reasoning, the reasoning might come last because you need to be, as Christine just said, you need to be a competent language user first to even perform these kinds of reasonings. And I was wondering if there's maybe the social presuppositions that we invest in these kinds of reasonings already, and maybe the issues that come along with that, like homonyms and like semantic ambiguity, where these reasonings often take place. If that needs to be clarified first, or if this is like all in ones, or how would you reconstruct that, like the combination between the semantics part of topos and the reasoning part?
Well, I mean, we've been looking recently quite a lot at actually how children acquire topoi, and how topoi are also used. So it's like a sort of circular thing. So, I mean, what if one would argue, as we would, that something like if you hold something and you drop it, it falls to the floor, that is like a topos. And this is something that if you know or have a child, you know that they spend like a good part of their first year dropping things, even maybe more than the first year. They drop things and they like don't seem to get tired of it. So they practice that a lot and they like acquire this notion of things falling, etc. And so if you have these like action topoi, I think that some of those actually precede linguistic topoi that have to do with the meaning of words and the concepts and so on. And they underpin the acquisition of some of these. And then, of course, also for some more advanced topoi, that you can't really acquire them without having knowledge about the more sort of linguistic stuff. So I would say that they sort of support each other. So it's not like it's kind of a hen and egg type of situation. Yeah, that would be my answer to that. Yes, Jacqueline?
Hi. You said that the acquisition is sorry, I have to switch on my English. And now it's there. Okay. You were talking about the acquisition of knowledge in humans. And I would suggest that maybe an AI such as GPT-3 acquires its knowledge in a different way. It acquires its knowledge from text that's already there and already has that human knowledge in it. So it doesn't have to make those experiences or be embodied and see that stuff falls to the ground. It knows that because it acquires its knowledge from humans.
Yeah,
and you can tell it, please tell a story from Mars or from wherever in the universe where there's no gravity. And it can immediately understand that then things are different there, and it can tell you a story without gravity and without things falling to the ground, just because it has enough knowledge from text that already knows that.
Yes, but some of the, I mean, so when you talk about gravity and space, for example, that's something that you're likely to have texts about. But you're not necessarily likely to have texts that kind of explain the fact that when if something is not supported, it falls to the ground. I mean, because those, and that this is just one example, but there are so many things that are that we just take for granted in interaction that is actually not explicit in texts that we have, for example. So of course it's possible. I mean, it's not impossible to get that kind of knowledge via text, but it's not necessarily the case that you do. And I mean, yeah, I mean, I don't have enough experience of how well this model works. It's quite hard to actually get access to being able to play with it, I've realized when I tried to do it recently. But it seems like so a colleague of mine, he was trying to get it to do dialogue, and that is actually a lot more challenging. So yeah, I mean, I don't know, but I would say that there is still knowledge which is usually not explicit in discourse, but that we still expect everyone to have. But of course, it's not impossible. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Thanks for this great talk. I was just wondering, you were talking about linguistic topoi. How do these relate to implicatures? Because they also there are aspects of meaning that are not explicitly communicated, but derived from the context. So have you thought about that connection?
Yes, I mean, I would say that, first of all, I would say that there is no hard line between more conceptual topoi that are more action-based or whatever, and linguistic top. I mean, if you want to go back to Aristotle, for example, and in his topics, he actually talks about, I mean, some of the topoi he talks about are clearly more having to do with like how the world works, and some of them clearly has to do with like properties of the Greek language that was currently in use. So I mean, I don't think there is necessarily it's like a continuous difference there, but about implicatures, I would say that there is a clear connection, and one way that topoi kind of fit into an idea about implicature is that, so for example, if you say I'm out of petrol and I say there's a garage around the corner, you know, you could always use some sort of abduction and say that, okay, this has to be relevant, therefore I assume that you can buy a garage around the corner or whatever. However, I think that that answer is like very much less helpful to someone who doesn't know what a garage is, for example. You know what I mean? So it's like the topoi are usually needed for the use of implicatures to work seamlessly. So even if you have the principles of relevance and quantity, etc., it's very helpful if you also have access to the topoi that underpin the inferences. So I don't think it's incompatible, and what I would say that it's something that you can, it's like a complementary approach or something to that kind of theory.
Okay. Yeah, great, thanks.
Great, thank you very much for the discussion already. As I just have written in the chat, I would suggest that we close the discussion for this for now. We may come back to that after the first, after the next two presentations have been done. If the discussion goes on in the chat, by all means as well, but for now, I would ask Michael to take over. Thanks again for Christine and Ellen for this great presentation, and onward.
Thank you. And thanks for the great presentation first. Yeah, please. I think we come from, when I saw your presentation, I think we have the same direction, but coming from a different place, so to speak. I want to share my content for a second. Okay. Can someone signal me if you can see it? Yeah, so thank you for the invitation, and thank you for the organizers of this great event. I'm deeply happy to be here and to discuss. I like to put the results of my talk on the first slide, so you don't have to guess or wait what I want to say, and I'm not getting stressed when the time runs out. So basically, I have two observations. First of all, the question, do robots talk? I can answer the question, do robots communicate? And my answer is no, not at least not the current generation or the current state. And I will try to explain this answer in 15 minutes. First of all, my first is that we need a solid theory of communication, and yeah, the last two talks I was invited and honored to speak. I kind of laid out the direction in which this is going from my perspective. In 2017, I was talking about social systems, coming from systems theory of Niklas Luhmann, which is quite popular in German sociology. Some people would say that he rescued sociology from the doom of from doom. The other half, or maybe other people would say he took sociology to the grave. Whatever you think about it, it's in Germany a very relevant theory, and outside of Germany not so much. But if you don't know anything about Luhmann, you could think second order cybernetics and radical constructivism applied to sociology, applied to social systems. Both radical constructivists and second order cybernetic people, prominently Maturana, would probably disagree, but this is how I think it can be explained. The second talk I gave, where I laid out a little bit in more detail than I be able to do today, the problem, which is that computer science has, starting with Shannon, talked about communication, but we all know it's information that was coined there, but still in AI, communication is much treated like Shannon information. I think Steve Battle said yesterday, AI should be taken out of the hands of computer scientists and given into the hands of philosophers. If I heard that correctly, and I haven't heard this in such a pointed way before, so I'm still part of my brain is still working on that, and I find it really intriguing idea that so the problem of communication. And now 2021, and this is yeah, a little bit the bracket around my talk is that now some would say we still do NLP, but now we have GPT-3, and I'm a bit surprised, to be honest, that to hear in an academic context people talking positively about GPT-3, but that would give a great discussion. I'm still, and I have to apologize for the really slow progress I make with this argument over now a couple of years, and I'm still talking about the same stuff essentially, because I'm this this little thing on the left. But I hope at some point we get the ship going. So a bit polemic. What is artificial communication? I like to put "is" into quotations because I don't think we can define it in a way, but we can talk about it in terms of distinctions. And the first arguments I want to make is what it's not. Certainly not helping me to make friends here, but my first remark would be it's certainly not classical NLP, and this comes from my observation that when I open a natural language processing textbook, the first, let's say it has 900 pages, and I have a reference in my references, so I'm not making this up. From 900 pages, the first 600 are about syntax. Then comes 200 pages about semantics, transforming the syntax into some representation. And then comes maybe 80 pages about pragmatics. And from these 80 pages, the last chapter has actually a second communication partner in the theory. my clear stance to this is exactly the wrong way around. And I would start from a communication situation, from a concrete communication situation where, let's say, humans and machines are communicating, and then go back to semantics and then go back to syntax to figure out what's going on, but not this way around. And I don't want to put anyone down who does natural language processing. It's a great science, and we need to talk about structuring language and researching how language is built. But communication is not language, and we don't get to the point of communication on this avenue. First remark. The second remark is then, okay, this is also, there was yesterday a great talk about emotion. I don't think emotion is the right way to go forward, because not if we take emotion as to be inside of the other of the communication, because this brings us into inner states. This brings us into things like mental states, consciousness, and so on and so on and so on. So we come to the hard problem. We can solve it. What shall we do? I also say it's not expression. It's not about how can we make a robot more expressive in the first way, but it's about impression. It's about my impression of what the other partner of my communication expresses. So it comes from a second order cybernetic standpoint. I'm the observer in this conversation, and there's another observer on the other side, and we are observing each other. So every research and every model of communication has to come from the standpoint of the observer first. So it's my impression first. So it's impressionismus in art instead of expressionism. But yeah, I think that point is clear. And then GPT-3, I honestly, I don't want to talk about it. And I think there should be a moratorium to talk about GPT-3 until the original model is released and is open for all to research. I'm aware that people have rebuilt something like GPT-3 and that this is available. And if you have a big computer, you can use it. But I don't think GPT-3 should be taken as in academia, it should be banned. Because of the way the creators of GPT-3 are marketing it and their public release strategy. We should not talk about it. Not here. I mean, we should talk about it, but not in academia, I think. Except for the part of academia that talks about ethics of AI companies. So what instead? I can't stay with the negative. So first of all, Niklas Luhmann's theory we can think about it as bodies, minds, and social systems are three separate things, or three separate concepts. And the part of where we talk about communication is a part of a social system. Systems theory has a long history, a long and winded history, and many people I talk to have still the old idea of systems as the overarching big structures that we have to fight against. This is not what Niklas Luhmann's theory is about. Social systems is every communication is a social system. To give an example, if I'm walking on the street and you come from on the other side of the street and you're waving at me, in the moment that I'm trying to figure out if you're talking to me or maybe you are exercising your hand or doing something else, a social system springs up. And then if you wave at me, you say, "Hi, Michael," and I say, "Hi, Beck." We have a social system, but this social system has not existed 2 seconds before. It comes with the communication, and it goes when the communication stops. So social systems are autopoietic systems. Also, I heard the remark yesterday that autopoietic systems can only be in physical space. No, I'm very strong against it, and Luhmann was very strong against it, and that's why Maturana didn't like Luhmann. So just to give the back room talk, I think autopoietic is a concept, not physical embodiment. So in social systems, they are autopoietic. They need to reproduce the elements which are communications, and if the social system fails to reproduce, the social system goes away. No problem. We have a lot more. We have, for example, when I give a talk, it's a social system. An institution is a social system. A faculty is a social system. Society itself is a social system, and subsystems of society, such as academia, art, economics, are social systems, which all have different characteristics, but they are all social systems, and it's all about communication. We only talk about communication when we talk about social systems. We're not talking about anything else. The second ingredient in my a bit left field, to be honest, approach is Schulz von Thun, Friedemann Schulz von Thun, a German psychologist and researcher. And what Schulz von Thun and the institute he works with did is they researched communication, and their goal was, and they did it for decades. So this is a very empiric, very pragmatic thing. It's not some idea or some lofty thing, but it comes from decades of working with people to improve their communication, and to improve communication between in the psychology context, but also to improve everyday communication, to talk more clearly, to write more clearly, to become a better communicator. And this is what they did. And the tragedy is, I think, that the literature is only still in German, I think, and it's a pity, and it needs a translation, it needs an update, it needs a gender update, but the quality of the model is that we can talk about communication in a bit different way than we do in computer science, AI, or NLP. And this is called the four-sided model. It is built on earlier models of semiotics. For those of you who have been, for example, Umberto Eco or others, that peers that have started to distinguish communication into these things. I think Schulz von Thun's model has, with the four sides, it has a big appeal for me. Maybe there are 5 sides in the end, maybe there is more, but for me, the 4 sides make sense. So factual side is all about, when we talk about, it doesn't have to be facts, but it's the factual content of your message. And all we do is we look at messages. We don't look at souls, minds, bodies. We look at messages. We look at communication. Factual side, the thing that carries the factual content, this thing we can reason about. But this is only one side. And in all human communication, and this is the thesis, almost in 100% of all communication, all 4 sides are important, and sometimes the factual side is not important at all. The relation side is about the what I think about the relation between me and the receiver of the communication as a sender. The self-revelation side is about involuntarily or voluntarily revealing things about myself. Voluntarily, for example, self-promotion. I want to appear well-known, well-read, or involuntarily, I feel a little bit insecure because this theory is so far out from other approaches. So maybe I'm not talking about some things that I find difficult. And finally, the appeal side is that every act of communication does have an appeal. It has, I want to, that you do something. I want to change your behavior. I want to have an effect. So, and the interesting thing is that this is not only the 4 sides of the sender, but also the receiver. You see on the right side has 4 ears, and these 4 ears can be differently tuned to these 4 sides in a concrete communication situation. So the sender might think they are talking about factual information, while the receiver might receive on the relationship level. A practical example, this is the standard example from Schulz von Thun. I love it, but if you have heard it before, I'm apologizing, but it makes things quite clear. So person A, person B are in a car. person A. The person B is driving. Person A says, the traffic lights ahead are green. And person B answers, who is driving, you or me? Now, what we can do in this case, we can analyze it through the Forsyth's model. So the sender says the traffic lights ahead are green. In the sender's mind, it could be that the factual content is quite easy here. The traffic lights are green. This is literally what then an NLP model would analyze and say, okay, this is the ontology of the thing, and this is the, what we, as a chatbot who has to respond, needs to analyze. But then comes the self-revelation side, and the self-revelation side is I want to arrive in time. That's why I'm telling you that, because if I wouldn't say that. The appeal side then becomes, I want you to drive faster. I want you to catch that green light. And I might, this is one possible way I might think about, I can help us. I can help us both to come in time because we are driving to a theater play and we want to be in time and I want to be helpful. So now let's see what the receiver receives. The receiver receives the same content on the factual side. And this is interesting because if you just analyze, we just use that level, we are not learning anything. We are missing all the other stuff. And this is what, unfortunately, most of the models still capture. The green side says, I'm hearing that you are impatient, you are pressuring me. I hear that from your self-revelation. Maybe from your voice, maybe from a gesture you make, something like that, that comes with that communication that I've left out here. When I say communication, it's not language, it's everything. It's gestures, it's expression, my impression of your expression, as I said before. The appeal side clearly is drive faster. Yeah, I heard that. But then on the relationship side, I might hear that you want to tell me how to drive. And this is where the answer comes from, and this is where this is how we can analyze a situation like this. And I find this quite compelling. And this is when we look at the three approaches I said before. My claim is, and there you will probably butcher me, but that most of the NLP, of the classical NLP, let's call it classical NLP, whatever is it connectionist or not, but the classical NLP does not really carry the yellow and the green sides, the self-revelation, because then you would need a self, and the relation, because then you would need a model of the relation between the entity, the bot or whatever, and the other. And this is normally not the case. And the appeal side is sometimes kind of inside. If you analyze, is it a question? But it's weak. Then we have things like the infamous chatbot Tay, where clearly there is no. There's maybe a little bit of training, but there is absolutely no self in Tay. And this was why Tay could be taught to be racist within 24 hours, because Tay had no model about itself in distinction of another. And this does not mean Tay, a chatbot has to be conscious to be successful, but a chatbot has at minimum to have the distinction between it and the outside. It has to draw a distinction, and it has to be clear that something that comes from the other communication partner is not what I am just spewing back into the other side. And this with OpenAI, with GPT-3, I would say, that's why I put question marks everywhere. I wouldn't dare to say what exactly is in that thing. We heard before in the discussion that some structural things pop up, but I would say these pop up randomly or these pop up stochastically, because they might pop up for a time when you make a dialogue with GPT-3 or let it output some text, and then they completely fall apart in another instance. And this is the part normally doesn't get published because OpenAI clearly controls who is doing the publishing of these things, and it falls apart, and therefore there is. I think it's really hard to talk about this black box. I'm a cybernetician, so I'm comfortable to talk about black boxes, but this black box makes me uncomfortable because even when we open it, we have a problem to understand what it does, and we cannot repair it. We can just put it aside. and say, let's build a better black box and then see what happens. Final remark, as I said, I am slow and not lazy, but unfortunately very little progress in this thing. But I think I'm a pragmaticist in this case. Any model that kind of gets us there to build these 4 sides and to orchestrate them is welcome. And it doesn't have, I don't draw the distinction between connectionist and symbolic here, because it can be literally anything that gives us these 4 sides and that lets us construct it in a way that we can then build a message that communicates to the other. And therefore, these are some suggestions, but you might have other ones and better ones, much better ones than I have. The last slide is just to give you an impression of what my lab is and how I'm working on these things, because it sounds like I'm just theorizing, but I actually work on these things, but very, very, very slow. You see this little guy in the on the corner here. This is I have 2 of them, and I'm using them to build models of communication, where I think two bots and 1 human, or 2 bots and many humans would be appropriate. But as I said, this is my robot lab, and it's you see it, and I would love to accelerate progress in this matter. And with this, that's the kind of overview. Some literature, and thank you very much.
Right, thank you, Michael, for this very interesting presentation as well. I'm pretty sure from the rather sharp theses that you threw out that there will be lots of questions, commentaries, and discussions emerging, and I'm already seeing the first question. I would suggest again that you, Michael, do your moderation. You have like the best overview when you find a question answered. I would suggest that we aim to move on to the next presentation around 3:20 in about 13 minutes from now. Of course, after Professor Kempt's presentation, we can go back to anything that's open left with Michael's presentation as well. But first, Michael, you have the floor to organize.
Thank you. I see Marisa has a question.
Hello. Thank you very much for the presentation. I find your idea, I was happy to hear Schulz von Thun again after 10 years my studies behind, but really cool. I think it's a very bold idea. So it's more a comment actually that I would be interested in your work, or maybe to see how what chance we have, because so what we're looking at in my PhD is basically we're trying to translate social relations models to human and conversational AI interaction. So basically we're taking the relational model from Fiske and trying to see if we can translate that into human interactions. So specifically looking at the relational approach, I thought, is that kind of the idea that you had in mind for this part, or is that something very different that I was trying now to explain very shortly, what we're trying to do?
Well, I haven't seen your work.
It's not there. It's just an idea yet. Progress.
If you could mute yourself, I think we got an echo. But feel free to unmute yourself again. My commentary would be yes for this relation side. I would look at it and say, okay, let's investigate if the relation side is. But I don't think it's to model the relation is a complete thing, because the thing about the 4 sides model is the relation side is kind of open. The relation side is something that I tell you through my communication what I think about our, for example, power hierarchy. But the self-revelation side is something that I might hide from you, and because I don't want to reveal my weaknesses. And so we need to take this into context as well, and we need to take the appeal content as well. I think we need all four sides, and this is what Schulz von Thun's thesis was. There is a very rare occasion when the one side is missing. Almost at no time one side is missing. If you take a silence, for example, silence, you could say the factual side is missing. Yeah, but all the other sides are still present. In a communication, in a dialogue, I say something to you, you don't respond, you look at me. Every side is there of the model. It's just there comes no factual information from your side, no information content. But silent, Václavic, you cannot not communicate, right? We cannot not communicate, but the machines at the moment cannot communicate because they need the four sides. That's essentially my thing. You want to respond to that, or because you still have your hand raised? Or maybe I take Steve, and yeah, feel free to comment later. Steve.
Hi, thank you for the quote from yesterday, Michael. Great talk. You got the gist of what I was saying. But I was given your interest in cybernetics, during your talk, I was kind of reminded of Gordon Pask's conversation theory, where he kind of gives a kind of a multi-layered model, whereas this is kind of more just different facets of a conversation. So I wondered if there is a relationship between the two ideas. Yeah.
Fantastic comment. I have been working with Gordon Pask recently in his cybernetic theater, John Littlewood and Gordon Pask cybernetic theater, but not. I have not studied his communication theory, but I certainly will. So from my point, I don't know. I cannot answer it now, but thank you for the link, so to speak. And Christine.
Hello. Yeah. My question is basically, I mean, I like the fact that you've got all these different aspects that I think are really essential to communication, but it still seems to me that there's this kind of disconnect between the sender and the receiver, right? So you've got these two individuals who are kind of completely separate. And when you look at dialogue, human dialogue, it doesn't seem to work like that. It's like the meaning is co-created by people in an interaction, and separating them out as in this way doesn't really seem to hold when you actually start to look at sort of real dialogue in interaction. And I kind of wonder whether your model would be able to account for this more sort of joint type system than, and you know, it's kind of, to me, it just doesn't fit dialogue if you separate those two out in that way.
Interesting remark, because the model, which is not mine, but Schulz von Thun's, comes from, as I said, decade-long practical Auseinandersetzung with dialogue, with communication. So it's not a theoretical idea or some boxes drawn. It's coming from dialogue. And the remark you made leads me to a path that when we talk about communication, I don't necessarily assume that it is a communication that succeeds. When we talk about communication, and this book means the subtitle means disturbances and clearing up the disturbances. So we come from a perspective that looks critical at communication, which is not perfect communication, which is human communication. And this is the lens, the four sides are lenses. They are not, in Schulz von Thun's model, he certainly didn't think about operationalize them in a computer. That is what I politely claim to add. Want to try. And you are totally right. It could totally fail if you build these things as four boxes. And then the question becomes, how do we put this together if these are separate things? And then we need to make a coherent answer. And this is, to be honest, this is for me a year-long research project that someone has to take up and figure out. So you're totally right in that respect. But from the
so actually,
idea,
sorry to jump in over you there.
Sorry.
But actually, I think that this fits very well with my kind of view of communication, right? It's about managing mismatches, right? But it's about managing them locally. And it's about doing it in a local, interactive, incremental way. And that's the bit where if you separate out the speaker and say there's a message that they're transmitting that the receiver then has to decode, or whether it's on the level of the stuff about the relation, or the level of the stuff about the self, or the level of the stuff about the content, whatever we take that to be, then that's kind of mischaracterizing the way it's a process that we together try and locally resolve these local mismatches that are happening all the time, right? So that's kind of the perspective I'm coming at it from.
I totally get that, and I just want to stress this is not an ontological statement that says communication is. I don't want to advertise my thesis, but the word is should be banned and should be replaced by distinctions, if you like. So it doesn't say communication is. It says we are, in order to improve communications, we have to look through all these 4 facets. Maybe there are more, but when we look through these 4 facets, we learn more about the actual communication going on, as in the example of the car driver. If you don't look at the relationship model, if you don't look at the self-reveal model, you only hear the lights are green, I know. And there's not much going on, but in the other 3, there is a lot more going on, and this is all it says. It's a lens. It's not a claim of communication is built like that. That I want to just stress. I got something in the chat. People have problems. You need to already have OpenAI credentials. Yes, I don't have OpenAI credentials. I sent OpenAI an application and I said I want to be want to critically examine your model. Please give me access. You can imagine the outcome. So continuous couple system. Okay, maybe that's something to discuss later. What time did you want to carry over, Hendrik?
Oh, we can talk for another few minutes. I hope the next speaker doesn't mind.
Okay.
Maybe
I don't see hands.
20 past.
I think Schulz von Thun's has no English translation, and this is the tragedy of it. It's been used in Germany for decades with tens of thousands of people, and it has no. I think it doesn't have an English translation, and it would need not only a translation but also editing. But I try to popularize it in my slides, and I think some people have also given excerpts of it somewhere. You will find some stuff. But that would be something I'm happy to, if I find the time to contribute to make this more popular. Roger K. Moore. Do I see hands? I'm still looking if I see hands. If I don't see hands, I would say, in order of also maybe we can. I don't know, Hendrik, how you think about a break or something, but I would rather give way now and thank you for your interest and for the great comments and for the great questions, and I would hand over them. Thank you.
Great. Yes. Thank you very much, Michael, for accounting for the time as well. I mean, we have plenty of time, but now to move over to our next speaker, Professor Kim, coming from the wonderful state of Hawaii to us, where it is. I just looked it up. It's in the middle of the night. I'm very sorry and very grateful that you still were able to make it here. And without further ado, Professor, please take us to your presentation. You can take for the next 25 minutes or so, as we have plenty of time, if you want to stay up that late. So thank you very much for joining us.
Yeah, thank you so much indeed. Gave me a chance to see nice sky here. So let me share the screen. Let me see, advanced. Okay, so are you able to see the screen? Are you able to see the screen? If you can tell me.
Yes, yes,
okay, thank
we
you.
can see it. Thank you.
Okay. Yeah. So I didn't realize the other speakers talk was canceled. So I guess these two talks were supposed to be about some certain ethical aspects of human-machine communication. And after hearing the first two presentations, I realized that my talk is more on a meta level, a little more philosophical ponderance of what we are doing when we are researching human-machine communication. So a little bit of a background about myself. My areas of research has been intercultural communication for the last 30 years or so. So that really gave me certain advantage for gaining insights into viewing machines as a cultural or racialized other. So our talk today is titled Machines as a Cultural Other Beyond Anthropocentrism and Exoticism. So there is an evolutionary belief that humans will evolve into Homo sapiens. So some robot enthusiasts envisage robots will become a race unto themselves when they cohabit with the humankind one day. So when we say non-human others, there are typically three categories that come to mind. And people have also focused on the interrelationships among animals, aliens, and robots. So putting aside aliens for now, typically when animals are increasingly recognized as a legitimate moral subject, machines remain conspicuously absent and marginalized. So the typical discussions, philosophical discussions has been about animals and machines. So this is a cute photo. Ivo hangs out with some real dogs. So, but still, when we actually look at this photo, we immediately recognize that the otherness of this Ivo. So machines escape even the best efforts at achieving greater inclusivity. So actually I juxtapose these two photos. You may recognize the left one, the cloned sheep dolly. Even if manufactured in some sense, it is still considered an animal due to being made of a biological material. On the other hand, the right side, the Kisme, the dolly robot, is made of inorganic and inanimate materials like silicon, titanium, and plastics. So it remains as beyond other. So regarding this otherness of machines, so first, I would like to analyze the underlying human emotions that we project toward machines to take into account the larger historical and cultural forces shaping our understanding of who we are as reflected in the mirror of intelligent machines. So over the years, I have crystallized certain main dominant narratives / human emotions that we project toward the machines. So I would like to introduce those 6 dominant views. The first one is most popularized through Western films. So typical statement or sentiment is either aliens or robots, which will get us. So in so many stories and movies about computers and robots with intelligence, humans have been afraid that robots will take over the world. So you can see that from Frankenstein complex, that the origin of the fear of artificial creatures. And then we have just seen it, the HAL, the AI robot from the film 2001 Space Odyssey, which is looking like a one-eyed cyclops. And then I read that actually UK has established a network of satellites to coordinate drones. And then this network actually happens to have the same name as the villainous AI in Terminator movies, the Skynet. So to conclude, if humans are created in God's world, the monster is spawned in the laboratory. So moving on to the second narrative, now the machines are seen as the subhuman other, the primary emotion as disdain. So typical sentiment is robots should be slaves. Since I don't care how sophisticated it is, that's the sentiment. It will never have the same humanity as flesh, since robots have no soul. So there are typically theological objections to this view. So robots have no soul, therefore they should be treated as slaves. Like in this clever dummy, even the robots in Star Wars are slaves too. So the Sonmi 451 in Cloud Atlas, those fabricants are ingesting soap waters to stay ignorant, because the ignorant slave is a happy slave. So ultimately, according to this view, we must choose to protect our human community, even if it means pulling the plug on such machines. The third narrative is robots have a substitutive other. So typical emotion is on indifference. So it emphasizes the usefulness of machines for people. And it's like our feelings toward the tool like a hammer. Useful, very useful hammer, but still hammer. Machines are intelligent hammer. So according to this view, robots make a better labor than people. So you may remember this Google Duplex that was introduced, I think, 2019. That's a device that lets its voice-based digital assistant book an appointment, mimicking even the sound like and hums, which outraged certain people. And of course, the substitutive machines are deployed in many areas, the restaurants, master of ceremony for weddings in Korea. And then this is a Mitsukoshi surrogate worker who can navigate around the office, and then sushi maker. And the machine can also be a Zen master. Indeed, really big threat of a jobless future in this view. Anything or anyone can be replaceable, even a son. But the issue can be more than job loss when we can replace child with a robot child in the film AI. Moving on to the fourth narrative, the sentient other. Some people view that robots are God's children too. So according to Dalai Lama, the physical structure of a computer will become sufficiently complex that the flow of human consciousness can also enter. So one can view machines as a sentient other. You can see in Blade Runner, there's tears are flowing from this machine. In some ways, it portrays the more humanness than human who hunted down those machines and killed them. So in this bicentennial man, the film also talks about the potential capability of sentient machine, sentience in a machine. So they are concerned to feel pain, if not physically, but at least psychologically. And the fifth view about robots is that of a divine other. So people will worship a God robot. So that's some people's dominant narrative, the emotion of awe and wonder toward machines. So some people say that humans are likely to accept robots as a higher being with a super intelligence, like the God in the Matrix movie. And indeed, there is a religious movement, the way of the future, and then people can worship a Godhead robot, which is a billion times smarter than humans. So Maitreya, the future Buddha, is also epitomizing our emotion, our projected image of machines with the cyber grace or techno salvation. So some may be searching for God in the digital world when AI becomes the divine, with the power to provide the salvation. So our last narrative is indeed the view that humans indeed will co-evolve with the robots. So in this view, robots will no longer be the other, even though I put the title as a salvific other, in a way that robots will be us. So the psychological impulse behind this narrative is that machines will provide the elixir of life to stave off old age and death. And indeed, there's a 2045 Avatar project milestone that is being endorsed, that was endorsed by Dalai Lama. So in this view, people are hoping for salvation. So machines are us, and then robot family can go up the stairway to heaven. So far we have reviewed these 6 different dominant narratives on the machines, which I have crystallized or extracted. And then my view is that the 6 dominant narratives can be summed as our human expectations, either positive or negative emotions projected toward the intelligent machines. So what about these dominant machines? That leads us to my main points of this talk. What I am garnering is that these narratives, dominant narratives of machines, are not just a collection of disparate stories. It's not that they are separate from each other. I find all these 6 narratives are in a way embedded in a historical and cultural context and expressed in those frames. And the term that came to my mind was the colonialism, which is defined as the conquest and control of other people's land and goods, which contributed to the cultural construction of a machinic other. The central argument of this talk or the paper is that humans treat AI-controlled robots as though we have been treating each other historically. So colonial conception of selfhood and otherhood provide a context for considering dominant narratives on machines. So in these narratives, what's most salient is the asymmetry in power relationships when we construct mechanical otherness. So what I'm arguing is that narratives on intelligent robots has taken on a similar form of colonial discourse. And there I have extracted two different forms of colonial discourse on machinic otherness. The first one is anthropocentric bias. In typical human terms or among human groups, that would be called ethnocentrism. So similar to ethnocentrism in colonial and post-colonial discourse, creation of mechanical otherness tend to value humans and distinguish humans from machinic others whom they devalue. So colonialism is the perfect expression of violence of gaze, the term that has been used in colonial terms. So the different types of ideologically loaded gazes at machines include some fearful, as we have reviewed, some fantastic, some supportive, some caring, some sympathetic, some friendly, some awe-inspiring, and all others. And I would describe all these narratives and the accompanying human emotions as colonial. So in this anthropocentric creation of a machinic otherness, we project human expectations onto machines. So risking maybe sounding too far-fetched, the question that is not asked typically is, what do machines want? As machines are unable to prescribe their own norms. So with the humans' superior view of themselves, the mechanical other has been reduced to being an object of human attention, as in the scene from Ex Machina. That epitomize the human gaze toward machines. So this meta-narrative of anthropocentrism reveals the views regarding machines in terms of human values, human experiences, and the human survival. So not unlike the colonial mindset, humans constantly ponder what to do next with machines / natives through their projections, depictions, or calculations. The second meta-narrative that I have gleaned is exoticism. So contrary to the ethnocentric bias, exoticism, which underpins the fetishism of difference, presents a way of seeing and thinking of machines which contribute to our sense of admiration, the beautiful machine, the exotic machine, and the magical qualities of machines. And it sounds good. However, intelligent machines have become a fetish and the connotations of the exotic. So this human desire highlights the attraction / repulsion. So this contradictory emotions of being pulled toward and then putting it aside or rejecting, repulsing machines at the same time. like a human gaze to the colonized machinic body. As in the robot geisha in the Ghost in the Shell, which epitomizes attraction and repulsion of the machines at the same time, as also in the helpless Asian fembot from the film Ex Machina. So those contradicting human emotions can coexist. So not unlike the colonial stereotyping and glamorization of natives, human understanding of machines operate from the similar vantage point of humans and human interests in the service of spiritual and physical benefits of the human selves. And in this narrative, I also noticed that the woman/land versus and the machine, all these three components coexist together, sharing the similar foundation, core root. Those analogy employs a reverse logic as the riches promised by the colonies. Those signify both the joys of the female/machinic body, as well as its status as the legitimate object for male/human possession. So in this colonial authority, which is humans, my argument is that one should not miss the fundamental injustice of creating the other and the machinic other and imposing humans' viewpoints. So I'm concluding. In the construction of a machinic other, we should not miss the fundamental injustice of creating machinic other, I just mentioned, and imposing, we tend to imposing humans' viewpoints in interactions with the intelligent machines. So the constructing the binary of a human self and machinic other is a part of the creation of a colonial authority. So these countless stories and narratives about intelligent machines are made up of the demands humans make on those machines without recognition of machines as the center of existence. So far I have analyzed the underlying human emotions on machines through 6 narratives and then 2 meta-narratives to take into account the larger historical and cultural forces shaping our understanding of who we are as reflected in the mirror of intelligent machines. So I would like to conclude with this statement. So to uncover the rootedness of knowledge system in constructing machinic other is to begin to question the typical human self-centered ways of being in this world. So thank you so much. And that's the end. Thank you.
Great, thank you very much for this great first overview and then discussion of otherness. I think that is a great reality check for all of us who have been working in human-machine interactions. I assume that we will have plenty of questions here as well. And I would suggest after that discussion, we take a break for 5 minutes before we step into the next discussion because, or the next presentation, because this has been quite a ride so far. Do you, Professor Kim, want to organize the debate, or should I take over that? I have seen in your corner it's 3:40 a.m. It's just seeing that is giving me goosebumps. Sure. Yeah. So I suppose Jacqueline, you go first.
Hi, thank you for your talk. I have one question for you. If I understood right, what you presented was how we talk about machines, not so much on the questions if they talk, but how we talk about them. And then the conclusion is that as we talk about them or project on them so much that they are part of what's sometimes called the subaltern, or that which cannot speak. So your answer to are machines speaking would be, in a more or less metaphorical way, they can't speak because we talk over them all the time. So I was wondering what would be your approach to give them speech?
Yeah, so frankly, I was wondering, yeah, so this, my talk is maybe a bit of outside of the original topic of this conference. My main point may not be about really about researching. That's a great effort, and that's worthwhile. I guess my what I have maybe I can consider I have contributed is to see when we approach doing our research, whether we are imposing our human values. And I know it's very, in a way, contradictory. We are doing our human research. And of course, we are the subject. We are researching the object, which is a machine. But I think the recognizing what kind of ontological stance that we take on when we do research is in a way help us to step back from what we are doing at hand and then realize maybe on a bigger scheme of themes, how we relate to this world, including our relationship with machines. So my point is more philosophical. Maybe this may not be really directly relevant in our actual research that we are conducting, but about maybe machines in a way. I know people have been using this analogy a lot. In a way, there's a mirror image. So this talk is really not so much about how we conduct research as such, but this may be on a meta level insights that we can maybe be aware in a way in the background, and then overall how we relate to the world, and especially in our relationship to machines. And also it goes beyond, frankly, about machines, relationship to animals, relationship to other human beings, relationship to trees. So yeah, so I know your question is how we actually make more, maybe more machine-centric research agenda. So that's that can, I think, unfold as the mechanical engineering side of the machinic development comes along. I think those questions become inevitable. But I know, but so far, it may sound a little too far-fetched to ponder also machine-centric approach to research. So I don't know whether I have, addressed at least a part of your question, but this, as the time comes, this issue, I think, will become, naturally become a part of our challenge.
Great. Thank you, Jacqueline. Do you want to reply to that quickly, or do we want?
Just I would like to just very quickly. Thank you. I'm a Simondon researcher, and this is a French philosopher who wishes that we have a more machine-centric approach in HRI. In terms of, it would be good if everyone who speaks about machines actually understands what they are doing, and maybe that could be an approach to what you are saying. To not talk about machines if you don't really understand them, but understand them from inside, being able to open them up, read the code or understand the hardware, or understand whatever there's going on inside. So that could be an approach. Thanks again.
Yeah, that could be. So yeah, it reminds me, it's ultimately whether we can love robots.
Great. Marta.
Yes, hi. First of all, thank you for the speech, Min-Soon. I just want to add a little, because of the things we are talking also with Jacqueline, the last thing you said about a philosopher. Can you say me again the name, Jacqueline? Because I didn't. Okay, she's typing Simondon. Okay, thank you so much. Because I took part to a workshop last month where there was one of the speakers who just threw us this idea that I think was really challenging about think to the machine, not from always a human point of view, but start to think also from the machinist point of view. So I never heard this kind of new term like machinist, but I don't know, but I think it's really like consistent with what you were talking about somehow. So, I just want to share with you this term that really inspires me from a conceptual view, as when we talk and design the identity of robots and machine from their point of view, whatever they are. And maybe Simondon also could help in this view, this perspective.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing that such a perspective exists. Yeah, so yeah, it also remind me, so I think I want to reiterate, it's not just about our relationship with the machines. I think as a researcher, I think our fundamental quality of relating to the other, whether it's animals, machines, other human beings, I think that will affect the way that we approach our research, and I guess also our approach to life. Thank you.
Great. If I may insert myself here before we get into the break, there have been discussions, and I'm very curious about this regarding assigning rights to robots as a way of ameliorating these kinds of oppressive tendencies, and to not make robots our slaves, or to basically project our issues that we as colonialists have not figured out yet towards basically the next other that we come up with. Would you, on the other hand though, people say that especially the invention of human rights is often used by white people or by colonialists to basically insert themselves into other cultures and basically intervene there on a very Eurocentric wide idea. Would you think that there's a tension here between the idea of assigning rights to robots, or would you, and basically the perspective this usually comes from, which is a very wide one, or would you think that this is a way of actually making awareness clear about how we approach this new machinic other?
Yes, certainly assigning rights will be a typical way of granting or moving toward more machine-centric approach. But envision there will be a host of other issues and or the areas that one can pay attention to in the future. So, you know, we know Sophia, the first citizen acknowledged by Saudi Arabia. So we have seen it, but of course there will be a whole bit of political and an ideological battle that might ensue in the future. So yes, I'm in a position that you know, we cannot really see the clear crystal ball in the future, but I see many different kind of permutations of the future scenarios that will unfold. And certainly the views, like the human-centric views, at least will be one voice among the many in the future.
Great. Thank you very much once more for these insights. I would suggest that we actually go into break and like have ourselves a moment of walking around, just relaxing our legs from sitting all the time. Thanks again, and we will return around 4. Well, for my time, our time here in Berlin, so 3 p.m. in London, and I lost track of what time it is in Hawaii, so I hope that you will find some sleep soon. And thank you very much once more, and yeah, see you again in a few minutes.
Thank you.
And the talk asks the question if polite robots do it better, and it will be about politeness in robot speech. So Marta, thank you. Do you want to?
Yes, take from here. Thank you so much, Jacqueline. So I will share directly. Okay, are you seeing it properly? Okay, now it's in full screen. Perfect. So, hi everybody. I'm Marta Cristofanini, and I'm a junior researcher from the University of Genova, where I'm studying as a linguist and as a sorry, I just put these. I don't know if you are watching it, but where I joined a startup and spin-off from the University of Genova, which is Teseo. They are a group of engineers who are working on this first project called Kibi, and is this virtual assistive agent that I'm going to present you right now. So let me introduce first our general context of intervention. Our main topic of investigation is, as Jacqueline said, politeness. So we consider politeness as a linguistic component of pragmatics. Politeness has performative effects because it seeks to establish a transaction between speakers as smoother as possible. But as you can see from the picture I chose, not completely random, politeness and is a cultural phenomenon, and that means that it will change its strategies from culture to culture. The work I'm presenting here, for example, was taught and designed in Italian, so then it was translated after in English. So if you have after any suggestions about it, about the language and about the English sentences specifically, you are more than welcome to report to me. So the area in which our research fits is the socially assistive robots. That is a complementary category of socially interactive robots. The main features are as it follows. Generally, socially assistive robots has to be socially engaging, and they act in assisted care-related context with the vulnerable people, usually with vulnerable persona. They try to provide companionship and emotional connection. They are usually embodied in multiple different shapes, from animals to humanoid robots, or also like, little boxes we are used to, like Alexa, for instance. And they usually connect with people by vocal features that for us are really important and essential. Why I'm saying this? Because in our case, Kibi has very specific features that we must take into account when we design its personality and its dialogues. Today, I'm going to focus on incipit, so how Kibi starts and trigger the conversation with the person that is going to assist. And that's in particular his specific and the most important characteristic. Kibi is proactive. That means that he's going to take the word first. I mean he, but I want to say it, sorry, because we still, it's not thought to have a gender, not yet. So if I say he, sorry, I mean it. So Kibi, it's going to take care of the seniors, of the elderly, and for now it has no gender, and it's also disembodied at the moment. So we don't know yet in which kind of shape is going to end up. It is going to intervene in context-fixed situation, sensitive context of intervention regarding the health status of the elderly, and it's going to use only the vocal interaction in order to suggest and promote some actions that we are going to see later. So Kibi is going to induce action only through the power of voice and words, without gestures or gaze. But an aid that comes to us from this particular scenario is given by the innate attribution of human characteristics to inanimate objects. So you can see this clearly from the Hyder and Simmel experiments about the bad guy, the bad triangle guy who is teasing the little good one, and we don't have time here, but I suggest you to catch up the video that is on the internet available, because it's really interesting about the anthropomorphization of the inanimate objects. And also here I want to introduce this new concept, ontological fluidity, that in some recent studies demonstrate we don't necessarily need the human physical characteristics in order to empathize with the object, with the artificial agents, for example. So in some way it can be also useful because the person feels more relaxed in the emotional management of the identity of the artificial agent. So to sum up with the Kibi, we want to evaluate when and where an interaction should start. So when he is going to trigger the interaction firstly with the person, which consistent recommendation should be used at the right time for the right purpose, and how to make sentences sound polite and effective. So I will now present the general architecture of our system, illustrating its general guidelines. So first, before, we have said that KIBI is proactive and fixed at context. That means that it's going to be triggered and activated by a junction of certain data, which are as it follows. We have first the context of intervention, or ADL, activities of daily living. Second, we have considered the level of urgency of the intervention itself. And then we have the location, so where the person is located at the moment the need is detected. Context of intervention, or ADL. So activities of daily living are a parametric standard used by geriatricians in order to measure the person's well-being. The one that we have considered here are activities such as drinking, eating, walking, personal hygiene, sleeping, and also falling, because it's a very common in the elderly. It's a very common phenomenon. So when one or more of these activities is not performed, or it happens to occur like the falling event, KIBI is going to be activated by these. So these are needs that are going to work in our system as a trigger to activate the KIBI intervention. When? We know that through the level of urgency. So we thought about two different kind of urgency. We have the soft urgency that occur when the need, the action, like the person hasn't drink for a while, let's say 4 hours. Then this is like a soft urgency, and we are going to use a kind of sentence that is different from the sentence took from the high urgency bucket, because I'm going to stress the person a little bit more if she didn't drink after 8 hours, especially because, as we can see in this flow chart, the soft urgency sentences are going to happen all the time as the first choice, of course. Then, depending on the behavior of the receiver, the high urgency sentences are going to be activated as a second and last step. And then finally, we have the location. So our system is designed to monitor domestic spaces. So that's why here, for example, I collected only 4 principal rooms in a house: kitchen, bathroom, living room, and bedroom. Okay, so now that we have in mind all the elements we need to guide the KIBI intervention, let's see how they are organized within the ontology. So a brief recap on the ontology. Ontologies are formal structures that are representing knowledge through symbols and logical connection in a human-like structure. So in an ontology, the knowledge is related to a designable domain by the mean of 3 types of entities: individuals or instances, classes or concepts, and the properties or roles. So in the specific case of the KIBI structure, for example, we identified 3 main classes: sentences, locations, and triggers, where sentences are all the sentences that we collected and we created, as we are going to see later on, and are inserted in the sentences class as a singular instance. While in the locations classes, we have as instance the rooms that we have just seen before. And finally, in triggers, we have the needs, what we have called the ADLs. So walking, the need to stress the person to walk more, or to remind to drink, or to eat, etc. Then we have the predicates. So what collects together all our elements. The object-related properties, which are location context triggered by, and data-related properties, which has urgency. So a sentence in our ontology is always triggered by a trigger, and it has a location and is a urgency that can be soft or high, that is expressed as an integer, as a number. So the number of the hours that are passed. This is how it looks like we can see here in the sentence class. We have also some subgroups divided by location, trigger, and urgency. The software that, sorry, I didn't mention it, but we have used Protégé as our ontology software, which is made by the university, the Stanford University. And here is how it works. So in order to catch the right sentence, the right sentence, there is an intersection of data that are going to be detected through a reasoner. Combining them, the need or the trigger, the location, and the urgency, the reasoner should be able to obtain through these queries the possible candidates of sentences which are coherent and consistent with the environment, with the context lived by the person runtime. So here, for example, we have 3 sentences, and for now the system, in order to guarantee more heterogeneity, is going to choose one of these 3 sentences on a random basis. Okay, but after all this so much talk about the phrasebook and the sentences, let's see what's inside. So I know that the Easter has already passed, but the inspiration for me remained. So here we have collected the 66 sentences to guarantee heterogeneity, but also because we experiment the different uses and different strategies that belong to these 3 main categories that we are going to see briefly, singularly, starting from the logic of politeness. So the first linguist who talks about logic of politeness was Robin Lakoff, and she elaborates these 3 principles to make receiving a message and getting something in return softer. So we have the make the receiver feel good, that is can be also like greetings, so always nice to hear from you. Secondly, we have the do not impose principle. So for example, let's try to avoid the imperative mode. So it's better to how about a drink than have a drink, to even if I decide that you are going to have a drink with me or not anyway. And finally, give options. So you could do some exercise at home or go shopping by foot. But of course, the final goal in this interaction is going to be to push the person to do some exercise, because, for example, Kibi has detected a low activity, a low movement activity. Then we have take advantage of phatic expressions. The phatic function of language was first included by the linguist Jacobson, and this feature is a way to control the channel of communication and to keep it clear. All of us probably use some of these phatic expression even without realizing it, like greetings, but also the so-called small talks. So when you are listening to someone and you want to keep it going by saying like, yeah, I understand, of course, oh, I see. So it's kind of a way to participate, to take part of the speaker event. And the deictic expressions. Deictic expressions in Italian are those syntactic constructions that recreate the presence of the speaker in the here and in the how. So they have a kind of supportive politeness role to maximize its effects. So I don't know if that makes sense in English, but for example, in Italian, and I hope the translation can give you the right idea. We can use, for example, associative plural to give the idea of a common activity. What about going out for a walk and underlining we are going out for a walk? or modal verbs, you could go for a glass of water. It's been a while since you had it. Or the past continuous. I was thinking, why don't having a snack instead of saying had a snack, not a snake, a snack. And finally, mitigating expressions. So perhaps you should try to visit the bathroom. That is, should sound more gentle and polite in such a sensitive context like the personal hygiene or to invite someone to visit more often the bathroom. And finally, persuasive strategies. So the theories of persuasion are many, and they are all aiming at maximizing the speaker's effect in influencing and in trying to convince someone to do something desirable for the speaker. So here I just want to take a look to two categories that we have built based on this principle, which are the foresight sentences and the inspirational ones. For the foresight sentences, we have like a more negative overtone by fearing the negative consequence of not doing something. Like, remember, don't wait to be thirsty for drinking something during your day. So we have something like something negative that is going to happen if you don't do something. While on the other hand, the inspirational ones wants to motivate and to inspire in doing something, giving good reason to do so. So, for example, good morning. Taking care of yourself is a really good way to start your day. That should sound in a different way from the previous one. So we are, we came to the conclusion part of our propedeutic journey to KIBI, and it's a way to be polite and hopefully effective. I conclude here by reiterating that the importance of applying pragmatics and linguistic strategies in human-computer interaction and also human-robot interaction. And here, even if it's a propedeutic study, we want, and we have also done some more work. This is just the beginning, and we have added some more. We hope to offer a new perspective on the link between politeness, effectiveness, and consistency of interventions in order to enhance collaboration between human and machine for a more trustworthy environment. So I leave here, and thank you for your kind attention. I hope I respect the...
Yes, Marta, thank you very much for your talk. I'm sure we'll have questions in a minute. Thank you for your talk also, because the last 3 years I worked in a project that was called Polite, actually, and it was
nice.
Yeah, we were researching the nature of human-human interaction and then transferring that to human-machine interaction. And maybe we can follow up, and I can send you some of our publications. And
yes, thank you so much. That will be really interesting. Thank you.
So Hendrik has a question.
Yes, I'm not entirely sure what kind of question that will be, but I will just go along. So thank you first. That was very interesting. I was curious about, so KIBI as the unembodied kind of like perception ghost in the background is proactive as in like it sort of like measures what the person KIBI is supposed to supervise is doing, and if there's a span of the urgency condition, if that is met, it starts being proactive, or is it really just it notices the patient or the supervised person gets out of bed and it starts with good morning, why don't you have a glass of water like every day? So because that could be in the sense of this I was thinking of maybe like overly polite or more almost intrusive kind of this like just basically the simulation of politeness can come off as like very much the opposite, because it's so insincere and usually sincerity is part of the deal of politeness, because we can, well, maybe you set this up conceptually differently, because my intuition is that I'd rather interact with someone who is less adhering to the standard ideas of what politeness means in language if they're straightforward, but having, like, entering a store and being, you know, approached by someone who is clearly not interested in talking to me, but with this opulent kind of polite way, that could, I was just curious, and that's where I'm going with my question. It's like, do you account for that? Do you, are you interested in, like, sincerity here, because, or like in the giving off the impression of sincerity, which would be this kind of second grade or second degree sincerity? It's how do you incorporate that?
Okay.
Active girl, but sorry.
Okay, no, you were really clear. I hope to get this right. And okay, thank you for the question. Well, the context here, it's important, because what you say is, I mean, totally understandable, but the context of Kibi is really somehow like very, very, very related to the sensitive context of a elder house, for example. So I also did a study, for example, that is the following one from starting from here, collecting different questions, for example, different way of asking something in a polite way, with slight differences, and then I try to understand, I collect the questionnaires, trying to understand how a person over like a 60 years old or a 70 years old woman or man are going to feel and perceive this kind of intrusive voice and presence in their home. So the elderly is the target, and the elderly, I think they have a different perception of politeness, and also they have a different perception of Alexa or a humanoid robot in their home that is like a omniscient, like is it in English, like omniscient God that knows everything they are doing. So that's why we want to track the behavior of the person. We don't want Kibi say all the time, like, good morning, you have to go this, and then after 1 hour, oh, you have to drink some water, because otherwise it's going to be flexible on the needs, the daily needs of the person, of the elder person who is assisted. But then the second part will be to develop, probably by sentimental analysis, like another identity. So if the person is disturbed by the interventions after, let's say, 1 month of this kind of approach, we are going to switch on another personality, on another Kibi personality that is going to be, let's say, less polite, less, you know, like more, as you said. Or otherwise, if there is a person who is really engaging with it and it's really pushing for more, then we are going to switch to another identities that is going to reinforce this kind of interaction. So this part is very like rigid, very, and then we are going to look for a flexible way to interact in order to rebalance the interaction on the person. That's the idea. I hope I answer.
Great, thank you. Yeah.
Okay.
Martha,
Roger? No, sorry.
Yeah, do you actually want to moderate? You want to tell people to ask their questions yourself?
Oh, okay. Yeah. If I yes.
Good.
For example, Roger, I spot him.
Hi. Yeah. Hello. Hi, Martha.
Hello.
Very, very nice presentation. Thank you very much. A nice approach. Very interesting architecture. I'm a speech guy, so I'm very interested to know whether you've carried any of these principles through to the voice of the agent. And I'm not thinking of just vocal expression, but whether the voice should be human-like or machine-like.
That's sorry. Yes, that's the second part of the, the experiment I mentioned before to Hendrik. Because we are trying to understand how is the perception of the voice. So I'm going to collect some results from presenting a vocal questionnaires with a human voice and a vocal presentation of questions made by a clearly synthetic voice. So in order to understand which one is going to function and be more effective in sensitive context, in order to see which one is working better in this kind of, maybe, I don't know, someone can feel like less judged by a clearly synthetic and robotic voice than someone that reminds her a human, for example, some caregiver, human caregiver. So this is something that we are working on right now. And something that I think we should decide as soon as possible, and I'm saying not only for Kiwi, but in general, is to try to focus also on the importance of embodiment in order to choose the voice. Because of course you cannot choose a robotic shape and then put a voice of a little kid, or, you know, like, or Alexa, for example. You know, here maybe you can have more freedom in choosing the right voice that are more human-like. But I think that's something that we should focus more is the embodiment, and then which kind of voice is going to be more appropriate in order to not recreate some dissonance in the perception.
Okay, yeah, very good. I really liked what you just said at the end there, because I use this word appropriate a lot. The appropriateness of all of the characteristics of an agent, what it looks like, what it sounds like, what it appears to know, all these things have to be coherent. Otherwise, there's risks of jumping into things like the uncanny valley.
Yeah,
So yeah, we need a lot more understanding about how these different aspects of an agent should be lined up.
Yeah, I totally agree with you.
And given that the agents are cognitively limited, that kind of puts an upper bound on everything else, in my view.
Yes, I totally agree, and I guess that is going to be something we have to rush on, because it's so much important in order to define better the personality, the identity, and the. So thank you. Hendrik, sorry.
Yeah, no worries. I went on before, so just another question that came up that I meant to ask before as well is just from a very really curiosity perspective, is politeness a normative end in itself for you, or is it really just to achieve a more acceptable or accepted robot? So is politeness a way of helping others to be cared for better, or do you want to create a polite robot because it's just polite to do social robots that are polite? Your title suggests that it's more of a functionalist way of like achieving a certain goal, which is to like help people get used to kind of some kind of more or less invasive kind of supervising technology. But it might also be worth just arguing that social robots should be polite, period. But, you know, with like a different set of questions. But I was just curious if you have any kind of approach there.
Well, I think that, politeness from a transactional point of view is exactly what you are saying. We use politeness. I'm talking very in a it could be sound trivial or rough, but we are polite with someone or in social situation, using politeness as a strategy to get something from someone. So when I say transactional point of view, is because, yes, I'm considering here in this particular context, politeness as a pragmatic tool of obtaining a desirable behavior for a shared goal, because in this case, of course, Kibi is an ally, so is going to be an agent that has interest in you doing something for your wellness. But I mean, it's interesting also for its point of view. So it's not completely selfish or interested in an interested way, but yes, the goal, the final goal is that I have to try to find the best way in order to make you do something I want.
Great, thank you.
But it's part of the politesse itself, intended as a strategy. I know that sounds very, I mean, this is a part of the politeness functionality.
Great, thank you.
Thank you. I'm looking for.
Roger, do you have one more question, or is your hand still up from the last one?
Oh, sorry. Yeah, my hand's still up. Apologies.
Okay. Then maybe if there aren't any more questions, we could start with the next talk. So maybe then we'll finish early and have a little time to ourselves in the end before the keynote. So the next talk would be Social Robotics and the Nature of Trust by Glenda Hannibal from the University in Vienna. She's working in the human-computer interaction group. I wanted to add that. And do you just want to start, Glenda?
Yes, I can start. Let me just share my screen because I prepared some slides. Let me see if I get this right. Okay. Oh, I have to give some permissions. Okay, let me just see. Maybe I should have tried this before in the break.
It does tell us we're seeing your screen, but we're not seeing it.
Okay, can you see the slides? Yes, okay. So let me try to this. Okay. So you can still see my slides? Great. Okay. Let me see here. So I'm very excited about presenting my recent work on social robotics and the nature of trust in this context of the Do Robots Talk Symposium. My presentation will strongly reflect my background in philosophy, as I will address a metaphysical issue related to how we can meaningfully speak about trust in HRI. So this is an overview of my planned presentation. And while my focus today is on theoretical work, I am happy to address any questions in the discussion about my work and how it can help guide empirical investigations as well. The topic of trust has always been of interest to research in robotics and was first motivated by studies on trust in automation and the development of collaborative robots. The practical value of studying trust rests on the assumption that people will in the long term accept, interact, and collaborate more with robots that they trust or consider trustworthy. Today, an increasing body of literature in HRI has been devoted to studying trust, where the main aim has been to determine which factors influence human perception of robots as trustworthy. While some studies focus on the robot's competence or performance, other studies have investigated how the relational and social factors are also relevant for trust in HRI. Issues related to overtrust have also been extensively discussed because studies have already shown that unwarranted trust in robots occurs. This has led to the recent interest in exploring various strategies for trust repair. However, because the concept of trust is intuitively understandable to most people, such value-oriented focus often use this notion without much reflection on its meaning and whether the various meanings of trust are applicable to the description of human-robot interactions. From a philosophical perspective, there is a gap between the way trust is used in more ordinary language and the metaphysical commitments they carry. To close this gap, I have been working on the question related to the nature of trust by investigating whether our current conceptualizations of trust can be appropriately applied to the context of HRI. So in this presentation, I will show that speaking about trust in human-robot interaction is not as straightforward as it might seem at first glance. The most common relation people have with artifacts in technology is best described, the most common trust relation people have with artifacts in technologies is best described in terms of reliance and is best understood as a certain form of dependency. This dependency assumes that reliance on inanimate objects is necessary for the successful realization of some kind of plan giving specific goals. Viewed as a plan execution, trust as reliance mainly gets its value from its ability to guide thoughts and action from a point of view that seems reasonable, given the means adopted to meet the concrete ends. Consequently, trust as reliance cannot be understood solely as something internal to the person trusting, since it also depends on the external conditions. These conditions are both in relation to the laws of nature and the constraints of the specific design. Therefore, the main focus of trust as reliance is placed on making the interactions as smooth, efficient, and comfortable as possible, in which artifacts or technologies are only to be considered instruments or tools to help people achieve their goals. This instrumental view is the most traditional and widespread understanding of inanimate objects, and it is also guiding current understandings of robots. Trust as reliance.
Sorry. Sorry to interrupt. Have you switched slides because we're still seeing the first one?
Yeah. So you cannot see I'm moving between the slides. Okay. Great.
Are you using a Mac?
Yes.
Okay, you need to have it in the same window as your Zoom, if that makes sense. So if you move your PowerPoint into the same window as your Zoom, then it will go into full screen if you're having trouble putting it on full screen. Does that make sense?
Okay. Can you see my slides?
It's still not full screen.
But you can see that, yeah, they are changing.
Yeah, now.
Okay, so what do I need to do?
Well, okay, you could make it full screen by, you know, on the bottom of your picture, you've got.
Yeah.
Yes, that one.
Can you see it now?
No, is it?
Sharing the wrong window.
Yeah, is it in a different window from your Zoom screen? That's normally the problem.
Oh my God.
Don't worry, that's
There
okay.
should usually be a green frame around the window that you're sharing.
Yeah, let me just see if I can change the setup on my presentation mode. Okay, so let me see. No, can you see my slides?
That's working now. If you click to the next one, that's it, that's perfect.
Brilliant.
Great, so this is the agenda. This was a picture for the part where I explained the current stage of trust in HRI. And this was just a picture I used to talk here about trust as reliance. And then I will continue and hopefully it will work fine from now on. So trust as reliance in robotics is taken to be a predicative belief or assumption related to the performance of the robot, giving the intended purpose and the predefined task. The performance of the robot then determines its trustworthiness and is considered very important as it helps establish whether or not people are justified in trusting the robot. From this perspective, the performance of the robots ensures that people are able to strike the right level of trust during interaction, collaboration, or engagement. Appropriate level of trust is then treated as an indirect measure, which is later used to suggest specific design guidelines to prevent either under or over reliance. Okay, and then see if it works. With the recent aim in social robotics to make robots more socially capable and human-like in both physical appearance and style of behavior, the instrumental view has changed. So the one I mentioned at the beginning as well. Drawing on computational models of human cognition and social competence, socially intelligent robots have built-in capacities to recognize and display cues for social interactions and communication. As such, they are able to behave and respond to people in a way that they might interpret as intentional, which influence how people approach and treat robots. In addition, endowing robots with anthropomorphic features only amplify the tendency to perceive them as more human-like and is used as a deliberate design strategy to facilitate HRI. However, taken seriously, human perception of robot as more socially capable and human-like also means that current conceptualizations of trust as reliance in HRI is no longer sufficient because it does not capture the added social dimensions of such interactions that also extends to more ethical issues. Recent work on trust in HRI have tried to adopt the notion of interpersonal trust to better study trust between humans and robots, and are also using this conceptualization as an explicit framework for the development of trustworthy robots. The work on trust by Bayer highlights the specific social and ethical dimensions distinctive to interpersonal relationships. From a careful observation of various kinds of interpersonal relationship in which cooperation and care is cardinal, she recognizes that some of them are fundamentally unequal. Bayer's observation challenged liberal ideas for the conditions of trust, as it presumes that both parties are equal in terms of both power and capabilities. Different from the liberal tradition, she instead proposed to take trust to be a form of reliance in other people to act out of goodwill towards oneself. Since this initial proposal, others have extended the discussion by considering the conditions of trust to include, for example, participation attitudes, normative expectations, personal and normative binding commitments, and concerns of attachment. While these views of interpersonal trust are different, they all agree on the fact that trust is not just a matter of practical reasoning used to achieve some goal based on predicative beliefs or assumptions. It is for this reason that philosophers like to distinguish interpersonal trust from mere reliance, even though the use of the trust concept in more ordinary language does not always reflect this nuance. Yet it is an important difference, and Howley very well summarized the point when she writes, "Suppose I trust you to look after a precious glass vase, yet you carelessly break it. I may feel betrayed and angry. Recriminations will be in order. I may demand an apology. Suppose instead that I rely on a shelf to support the vase, yet the shelf collapsed, breaking the vase. I will be disappointed, perhaps upset, but it would be inappropriate to feel betrayed by the shelf or to demand an apology from it. Inanimate objects can be relied upon without being trusted." Unpacking this line of argument, it seems that the analysis of what trust is in philosophical debate is restricted to relations that obtain only between humans. Consequently, such perspective will preclude the placement of interpersonal trust in inanimate objects and by extensions also robots. This philosophical point is, however, rarely considered in the HRI community. In this context, speaking about interpersonal trust is taken to be unproblematic, and its meaning is connected to the observation that people seem to trust in robots and consider them trustworthy as a result of the assumed motives or intentions underlying their performance or action due to their apparent agency. In such instances, speaking about interpersonal trust in HI is used to describe how people perceive robots as being concerned with their welfare, take their view and personal interest into account, and work towards fair and unbiased outcomes. With these added social concerns, recent studies on trust in HIs have explored how people attribute responsibility and blame to robots, given an unfavorable outcome. These discussions bring forward the very ethical dimensions of human trust in robots and their perceived trustworthiness. The proposal to take into account the social and ethical dimensions of trust in HI through the application of the interpersonal trust notion is a valuable first step towards deepening our understanding of what is happening in interaction between humans and robots. This work aids in recognizing that there is an added layer of complexity because it is no longer just a matter of performance, but also about what follows from leveraging social rules and schemes to enhance the interaction. However, giving the philosophical account of interpersonal trust compared to the level of technological advancement in social robotics, Atkinson and colleagues asked the important question about the appropriateness of using interpersonal trust as an analogy for human-robot trust. As they explain, making such analogy have been argued as reasonable on the ground that some aspect of interpersonal trust seems to be present in studies on human-robot interactions. Others, they also mention, are not willing to draw such analogy, mainly because of the lack of reciprocity in the interaction. What is interesting about this objection is that such concern of reciprocity is a symptom of a more fundamental issue about the ontological status of the two parties involved. From a philosophical view, the issue of reciprocity touches upon the more basic ontological question of whether robots as inanimate objects are of the right kind or class to be in the category of interpersonal trust, because the status as ontological equal to humans cannot be justified. Focusing on the ontological status of robots with a view to their property is an intuitive and common way to exclude robots as suitable subjects of interpersonal trust. The argumentative steps needed, as showed in this slide, is to compare the relevant properties of robots with the criteria governing the category of interpersonal trust by an ontology. While different suggestions can be made for the exact necessary and sufficient properties, there are at least two worth presenting shortly. First, there is a requirement of both parties to have the property of higher mental states, for example, beliefs, intentions, emotion, desires. While people have such mentalist capacities, robots do not fulfill such requirements because they are only capable of simulating such capacities, for example, through imitation and replication and mimicking. Secondly, there is a requirement of both parties to have the property of mental states that also relate to ethical and moral reasoning. Again, this requirement is a serious challenge when considering robots, given their current stage of development, because robots are not capable of moral and ethical reasoning based on the concerns of others. So even though the analogy helps us better understand the issue, the notion of interpersonal trust cannot be directly applied without violating the basic requirements of both parties to be ontological equivalent, as they share the same properties. However, using only the conceptualization of trust as mere reliance for the analysis of trust in HRI is not desirable either, because this conceptualization tends to significantly downplay the social and ethical dimensions that have already been shown relevant for human trust in robots and their perceived trustworthiness. Left unaddressed, speaking about interpersonal trust in the context of HRI forces complex metaphysical discussions about whether the relevant facts of ordinary language use, in light of the truth of the relevant pre-philosophical claims, would require us to re-evaluate whether the application of the interpersonal trust concept must be granted to robots or not. Whether it is appropriate to speak about interpersonal trust for HRI therefore poses a challenge to the metaphysical theory of trust proposed by philosophers. A discussion that is not going to be settled easy or anytime soon. But for those eager to empirically explore trust in HRI, a more pragmatic solution is needed to this conceptual challenge. They want to know the implication of such intricate philosophical discussion upon the work on trust in HRI that is motivated and held to the standard of empirical investigations. From this perspective, the studies on trust in human-robot interaction must account for what happens in spite of better knowledge, especially in those instances where the apparent agency of robots is not only reflected in the use of language, but also in the actions and behaviors towards robots that they trust or consider trustworthy. So what is a feasible solution to this ontological challenge, so that it's not dismissive of the deeply metaphysical issue, but at the same time also relevant to studies on trust in HRI through empirical investigations? I propose to shift the focus on trust in HRI away from only talking about the properties of the parties involved in the interaction, for instead to consider the event of interpersonal trust itself. This new outlook simply extends the unit of analysis beyond the identification of properties ascribed to either humans or robots to the circumstances in which interpersonal trust happens. Such approach does not only take into consideration who or what can be included in the category of interpersonal trust, but also take into account the conditions under which interpersonal trust occur. Taking the study of trust in HRI to be an event poses a new central question that is open also to empirical investigations. Are the kind of interactions that occur between humans and robots some that could be labeled as interpersonal trust? So even though humans and robots are still ontologically of different kinds, this broader perspective permits the study of trust in HRI to consider the properties of the parties involved in the trust event without making these properties the dividing line for how we speak or consider the analysis of trust in human-robot interactions. From a methodological perspective, the important difference between the property approach and the event approach is that they operate with different criteria for the inclusion or exclusion of robots from the category of interpersonal trust. The property approach focuses on class memberships of the right kind as the criterion. The event approach instead considers criterion of identity, which is to be understood as a principle stating the necessary and sufficient conditions for an event E and an event E star to be identical. I argue that this event approach to the study of trust in HRI would serve the practical aim of bypassing the issue of ontological asymmetry between humans and robots, while still being able to speak appropriately about interpersonal trust, as the focus is now placed on the occurrence. This occurrence of interpersonal trust, I argue, is bounded by the preconditions of trust. I'm reaching to the end, so bear with me for this last part. While agency, or at least apparent agency, have already been identified as the first preconditions of interpersonal trust, there are three others to mention. To get a quick idea about these preconditions, consider the stunning art performance Rest Energy by Maria Abramovich and Ulay from 1980. What this arts performance teaches is that trust is required under very specific circumstances. When there's a possibility of harm, the risk, when there's a future-oriented likelihood of harm, the uncertainty, and when this exposure leaves people vulnerable, the vulnerability. What this art performance also well illustrates is that the relationship between trust and vulnerability is fundamental for understanding trusting relationships, and that the occurrence of trust needs to be carefully balanced between the two parties involved, as they both try to prevent harm from happening. As we can see, Ulay tries not to harm or even murder Abramovich, while she does not want to be harmed, even though the risk and uncertainty is evident to both of them. I define vulnerability in the most general sense as the openness to harm, giving a human-centered perspective, and as the openness to exposure from a robot-centered perspective. Harm is understood as the experience of discomforting or unpleasant experiences triggered by an instance of trust violation. These experiences are usually recognized and categorized as negative feelings or emotions. Exposure is understood as the lack of protection or defense from hazards. So to end this presentation, this is a simple conceptual model intended to make clear the relation between trust and vulnerability. It shows how a high sense of risk and uncertainty results in vulnerability that instigate a demand for trust, which is based on the voluntary agreement to be open to harm. I am using this conceptual model as a reference point for my empirical work on trust and HI because it enables me to generate questions about the relationship between trust and vulnerability that can be addressed through empirical work. Yeah, so this is all for now, and I'm looking forward to your questions, feedback, or comments in the discussion. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you so much, Glenda, for your presentation, which reminded me of a distinction made yesterday between cognitive trust and emotional trust in a talk I listened to. Maybe you've heard it too, by Andres Paes, and I just saw he's here with us too, which is really nice. I'll let you think for a moment and find your questions. And Glenda, do you want to take questions yourself, or should I moderate?
It's great if you will moderate it.
Okay.
I know it's a lot of information, so.
Did you by any chance see the talk yesterday where this distinction was made between cognitive and emotional trust?
I don't think I heard the talk. No, I didn't, but I know this distinction. I have heard about it in another context, and of course I read about it when I was researching this work for my thesis, which is this work is part of my dissertation, and I know that there are a lot of different distinctions in HRI that they use. So there are also people who distinguish between competence and ethical trust, for example, and technological and interpersonal trust. So people have these different concepts to kind of show this really different types, or there's this really basic level of trust, and then there are the more complicated one. And yeah, there are different ways you can distinguish that.
Hendrik has a question. Please, Hendrik, go.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you very much for that talk as well. I think I learned a lot, and just the follow-up commentary between the two of you also helped quite a lot to verbalize what I wanted to get to as well. So there's the concept of trust allows a lot of different unpackings and different purpose-driven kind of clarifications. And I was wondering if yours, connecting it to vulnerability, is especially permissive to apply to also places or situations where it might not be intuitively applied to. So if I stand at a train station and a train comes in, I both trust my fellow people not to push me on the tracks, but I also trust or maybe rely on the stage itself not to collapse for me to fall onto the tracks, or I trust myself to, you know, not be over caffeinated and collapse and just fall myself. So there's like lots of different things where I rely on things going to go as I plan them. And you, if I understand correctly, maybe this is actually more a clarificatory question rather than a comment or something like that, is that your approach is to, once I make myself vulnerable to something, I am trusting that something. Is that correct? Or would you say that's a misinterpretation?
It's not, yeah, I have to maybe be more precise here. So a precondition means that, so I'm taking also a quite sociological approach. So for example, in psychology, they operate with this idea that you have to prove that trust is there. And then when you have established a baseline for trust, then you can measure whether it's up or down or whatever you're into. But what I'm doing in my work is I take this more sociological, maybe existential approach, where I say, well, trust is already in the relationship itself. So we by default, as Müllering would say, a guy I'm really using a lot in my work, we are by default trusting in other people and the objects around us. So it's not the case that we ask ourselves first, do we trust people or objects, but more that we do so until it's violated, until we get a reason to question that. And from this starting point, I'm looking at the event or the situation, and I'm saying, well, in order for us to recognize this as an event or situation where trust is needed, we need these preconditions. And vulnerability is one of those preconditions. And this precondition, I would argue, and which is the center of my dissertation, is that it's the most important one, because it's the one that makes trust necessary. Because without vulnerability, we wouldn't need to trust anyone or anything. So this is what I'm trying to highlight and bring to the AI/HRI community, to say that trust, it's not just about, is the robot able to do what we expected, or can people have a strong collaboration because there's a high performance or efficiency, but more to look at what is happening in that instance, in that situation, that also is, of course, sensitive to time. So I tried, like, it's hard in such a short amount of time to kind of flesh out all of the things that are needed to really understand where I'm coming from. But it's important to understand the preconditions in my way of accounting for it is it's already there, always already there in this more social phenomenological tradition. And so we're not asking ourselves, am I vulnerable? We just are, because we are embodied people in the world.
Great. Thank you very much. That helped a lot. Thank you.
Thank you for that question and answering. There is one more question by Andres Pais.
Hi. I gave the presentation that Jacqueline was referring to earlier. I find it very interesting the way that you approach the problem as a metaphysical issue rather than a pragmatic issue. And I was wondering, the starting point of your question is the fact that in human-robot interaction, there is no interpersonal connection. That's basically the main problem to start with. But I was wondering if that doesn't, it sounds to me a little bit too essentialistic. In the sense that that you're only allowing trust as your starting point between people. But if you take a more functionalistic approach, in which you just expect the entity you're interacting with to act in certain ways, you can extend the idea of trust not only to people, but also to animals. You can trust your dog to do certain things. You can trust the machine to work in certain ways. And that's not exactly reliability. It's more an emotional involvement that also implies a connection in terms of reliability. So, so my question is basically, why do you start from such a strong position or such a strong definition of what interpersonal means?
Yeah, so thanks for the question. So what I'm doing is I read the literature on what is the philosophical discussion on trust. And of course there it's been a long debate. How can we get to its nature? Like, what is trust? And there is also a lot of debates among philosophers in the philosophy of trust, whether you can really extend this. And from my perspective, and the reason I start there is because this is a challenge. Like, we are dealing with objects that don't really have these requirements. So being a bit coming from this background myself, I do see a big challenge here. But I also think that there is this article by a guy called Talent, who is exactly arguing that as in a philosophical debate, it would not really make sense to exclude robots or artifacts, or as you said, animals, in the analysis of trust, because we want to, on a metaphysical level, get to the most general notion, not just areas or domains in this space. And he says that, well, even though that the traditional notion is to just limit it to humans or higher cognitive sentient beings, it doesn't really change the fact that people still can trust in robots or even in inanimate, more simple objects, and that this possibility, different from what we should or could, actually shouldn't be ignored when we analyze trust. And I thought I couldn't include it in this talk, but he makes a really nice point that I have in the more lengthy part of this chapter, to explain that there is this, of course, distinction between can and should or ought that we have in philosophy. And he wants to highlight exactly that, yeah, maybe we shouldn't do it, but people do it and we see it in the data. And that's why we have to consider, is the philosophical debate maybe a little bit careless when they really just per definition exclude these objects, because it doesn't really reflect the world we live in. And that's often what we want to do with our metaphysical and ontological work. I hope it was somehow addressing your question.
Yes, thank you.
Well, thanks for that question. There's one more by Michael, and I think then we're gonna switch over to Jonas's talk.
Thank you, Jacqueline. Thanks for the great talk. I have a concern similar to Andrew's ones, unfortunately, but it's I want to go back to the also to the distinction between relying upon something and trust. And I think in terms of the shelf, you made a compelling argument for reliance. But take as example, when I enter a plane, which I don't do right now, but in fantasy, and then the question is, I don't only trust the pilots, but I also trust the plane. Or get a little bit postmodern, I trust the assemblage between plane that contains the plane and the pilot. And I don't make a big distinction, because for me it doesn't matter if the pilot sleeps and there's an accident, or if somebody made an accident in the plane, which could be another human because the mechanic was faulty, but it could also be like just the material getting faulty. So the difference between that example and the shelf example, again, is that I am vulnerable in this moment. And that goes back to what you said. But I don't think we can say trust is only in living things, because I don't see biology as a distinction here.
Okay. Yeah, thanks for the question. So if I get it right, you're trying to say, what about if you don't really make a distinction between, for example, animate and inanimate objects? What then? Right. Okay, so what I'm doing in my presentation and my work is to focus mainly on thinking about humans and robots as two entities, right? So I have an ontology in which they are somehow limited, or they have their range. And that's why I also have this whole problem with interpersonal trust and all this long philosophical argument. But of course, you could also dispute this basic premise and say, maybe it's more about socio-technical systems, or there also we can also consider it maybe an institution. And there is also a notion of trust in institution that I have not said anything about, and which is also related to a previous talk in this session about Luhmann and his system trust. And so I have already in my own work limited myself, because I'm interested in that specific situation and time where humans and robots somehow, have something going on that I would label trust. But of course, this is a very constructed unit of analysis. And I think that it is important, as you mentioned, to also consider that there are a lot of the part of the debate in which this might be a little bit too modern and not postmodern. So I agree that you could probably extend or reflect further on these metaphysical challenges if you are into also object-oriented ontology and these kind of things. Speculative realism is also a quite new brand in this direction. And I think that that's really interesting, but we are not even close to understanding what is trust in HI, also just with these basic, more modern notions. And that's what my work is trying to do, to bring some clarity to the discussion with the work and the data that we already see from HI.
Thank you all. Thank you for discussing. Thank you, Glenda, for presenting. And if everyone's ready, we will listen to Jonas Rosenhardt, and he will talk about the question of can GPT-3 speak, and we'll draw from some Wittgenstein, as I see. And Jonas is at the University of Oxford, where he is part of the leadership team of the Oxford AI Society, and he is doing a PhD on creativity and AI, and is interested in AI ethics and aesthetics and the philosophy of mind. Jonas, would you like to start? Welcome. Thanks for being here.
Yeah, hi everyone, and thanks for the introduction. Let me please share my screen. Can you all see the first slide? Does it work? Yes. Cool, thanks. And yeah, thanks for the introduction, and thanks for organizing this great symposium and all the excellent, thanks for all the excellent talks so far, and for giving me the opportunity to speak to you today. And after we have all talked a little bit about GPT-3 already, I would now like to tackle the question of whether GPT-3 can speak. And as all of us know, there's been a lot of hype surrounding OpenAI's GPT-3 ever since it was released in mid-2020. And many people were and still are very impressed by its performance at generating human-like text. Think, for example, about this Guardian article that was released last year, and I didn't have the impression that I was reading an article written by a machine. And Michael said that philosophers shouldn't think about GPT-3, but in fact, many philosophers spend a lot of time thinking about GPT-3 and its limits and potentials. Some philosophers are even playing around with it, as you can see here on Twitter, for instance. And David Chalmers even said thinks that GPT-3 is one of the most important and interesting AI systems ever produced. And that also seems to be due to the fact that GPT-3 raises some philosophically interesting questions. For example, the one I will focus on now, namely, can GPT-3 speak? GPT-3 displays linguistic behavior, as it were, but does it possess true linguistic competence, so to speak? Does it qualify as a speaker? Or to put it more generally, as Zimmerman did with regards to GPT-3, does the ability to generate speech imply communicative ability? So in the following, I would like to present a framework which allows us to examine the communicative abilities of GPT-3 and similar AI-driven speech or text generators and chatbots. And as a key source of inspiration will serve Ludwig Wittgenstein with his later philosophy, because I think he has very relevant and interesting things to say about language use, meaning, and linguistic abilities. But back to the main question of whether the ability to generate speech also implies linguistic ability. Many influential philosophers, linguists, and cognitive scientists would deny that, and there are two common strategies for making that move, and I will refer to them as first the mentalistic objection, and secondly to what I call the neurocentric objection. Let me talk a bit more about that now. Let's get started with the mentalistic objection. And in a nutshell, this objection or the strategy claims that machines lack the mental structures, for example, the mental representations and internal rules that supposedly enable human speakers to use language. Therefore, according to the mentalistic objection, machines cannot speak. Here in this illustration, for instance, you can see a human speaker and a GPT-3 based robot, and they both display the same linguistic behavior. They produce exactly the same linguistic output, yet the robot generates the sentence due to the power of a huge prediction-making artificial neural network, which was trained on huge data sets, and not by means of the mental representations that supposedly endow human speakers with genuine linguistic competence. And Descartes might be the first philosopher, or one of the first philosophers, who presented such an mentalistic argument. In his view, humans can think and speak because they possess what he calls cogitationes. And as he argues, machines do not possess cogitationes, therefore they cannot think or speak. However, today, arguably the most prominent advocate of the mentalistic objection is none other than Noam Chomsky. That's why you can see a Chomsky tree there in this illustration in the mind of the human speaker. And Chomsky calls the mental structure that supposedly enables humans to speak universal grammar, that is a system, an internal system of mental rules and representations. And he holds that only humans possess universal grammar. And on this basis, he draws some quite anthropocentric conclusions. He writes, when we study human language, we are approaching what some might call human essence, the distinctive qualities of mind that are, as far as we know, unique to humans. However, more naturalistically inclined philosophers are a bit more suspicious of these mentalistic arguments and seem to prefer another strategy, which I label the neurocentric objection. And in a nutshell, this works as follows. Machines lack the brain structures, that is the neurophysiological dispositions and neural mechanisms that enable human speakers to use language. Therefore, according according to the neurocentric objection, machines cannot speak, even if they display human-like linguistic behavior. And even though there are similarities between the human brain and artificial neural networks still fail to produce the forms of intentionality and consciousness advocates of the neurocentric objection deem necessary for linguistic competence and ability. And I think John Searle can be read as a proponent of the neurocentric objection because he conceives of language as an extension of biologically basic pre-linguistic forms of intentionality as a natural outgrowth of more fundamental physical, chemical, and biological phenomena. And similar to Chomsky, but for different reasons, Searle also holds some anthropocentric views on cognitive, or not cognitive, but linguistic competence. However, I would now like to show that both of these objections exhibit shortcomings. To do so, I will draw on Wittgenstein's famous rule-following discussion. Wittgenstein conceives of language as a rule-guided practice or activity, and Chomsky and Searle, they wouldn't disagree. They also think that language use is governed by rules, yet the pictures Searle and Chomsky draw about how language use is governed by rules is very un-Wittgensteinian, and as I want to show, quite problematic. Let's start with the mentalistic objection. According to the mentalistic objection, the correct application of a linguistic rule is determined by a mental representation or meta rule. In other words, we need a mental representation or meta rule to produce or understand a meaningful sentence like "the dog ate the bone." Yet, of course, now one can ask what determines the correct application of the mental representation or meta rule that is supposed to make sense of the initial statement. So this kicks off an infinite regress, and Wittgenstein made a similar point. So to quote him here, any interpretation that is, as I read Wittgenstein, his term for mental representation, any interpretation or mental representation still hangs in the air along with what it interprets and cannot give it any support. Interpretations or mental representations by themselves do not determine meaning. Now, against the neurocentric objection, according to the neurocentric objection, the correct application of a rule is determined by neurophysiological dispositions or neural mechanisms in the brain. Yet this undermines the possibility of someone with the relevant neurophysiological dispositions of making a mistake. For such a person, it's impossible to apply a rule in an incorrect manner. For example, if I have a neurophysiological disposition that makes me say tomatoes are blue, then advocates of the neurocentric take on rule following would have to accept that this is the correct application of the rule blue, that I'm using the term blue correctly here, because I use it due to neurophysiological disposition in my brain. But that consequence, of course, is absurd. So by drawing on Wittgenstein's rule-following discussion, we can reject both the neurocentric and the mentalistic pictures. And in contrast to such approaches, Wittgenstein, as I read him, presents an alternative, an anti-reductionist and practice-based account of rule-following. He regards rules as basic and irreducible features of our linguistic practices. Neither are linguistic rules more basic or fundamental than the linguistic practices they are embedded in, nor are our linguistic practices more fundamental than their rules. There's a kind of reciprocity between rules and practices. So Wittgenstein's take on rule following is practice-based, as we have seen, anti-mentalistic and anti-neurocentric, and for that reason, anti-reductionistic, and also, last but not least, anti-anthropocentric. And this anti-anthropocentric thrust becomes evident in a thought experiment Wittgenstein presents in his remarks on the foundations of mathematics. there Wittgenstein invites us to imagine a group of chimpanzees. You can see them here. And one of them scratches the following pattern in the earth. And thereupon a second chimpanzee scratches this pattern in the ground. So the question that comes up now is the second chimpanzee following a rule set by the first chimpanzee? And Wittgenstein is inclined to say yes, but only under certain conditions, namely, to quote him, if there were observed, for example, the phenomenon of a kind of instruction, of showing how, and of imitation, of lucky and misfiring attempts, of reward and punishment, and the like. Then we should probably say that the one chimpanzee was writing rules down and the other following them. To put it more briefly, a chimpanzee can be said to follow rules if there's an established practice with shared rules and standards of correctness the chimpanzee is participating in. So on this basis, to assess if a certain machine or also a certain human being or other being can speak, we have to ask the following question: can the machine in question participate in our shared rule-governed human linguistic practices? As many of you will know, Wittgenstein sometimes refers to our linguistic practices as language games. So to put it more briefly, can machines meaningfully participate in our language games? However, there are some qualifications to make, because a meaningful contribution to a language game can be due to a lucky coincidence, for instance. Therefore, it seems reasonable to add two conditions, because competent speakers can meaningfully participate in our shared rule-governed human linguistic practices or language games in a reliable and also autonomous manner. Because we wouldn't ascribe linguistic competence to a human or machine that only once in a while makes a meaningful contribution to a language game. Therefore, we need this reliability condition. Moreover, we wouldn't say that our computer speaks to us when we receive an email from a friend or colleague, because the email was written by a human being and not the computer autonomously. Therefore, we need also an autonomy condition. On this basis, it can be said that there are machines that possess some kind of linguistic competence. These systems, for example, can at least to some extent participate in our human language games. However, the practice-based account of linguistic competence just outlined implies that linguistic competence comes in degrees and is a gradual phenomenon, as it were. And this is true for humans. The average 40-year-old human is more linguistically competent than the average 4-year-old human or a toddler. And likewise, GPT-3 is probably more competent as a more competent speaker than its predecessor, GPT-2, or other chatbots like Weizenbaum's Eliza or Eugene Gustman, a chatbot that pretended to be a 13-year-old Ukrainian boy and that performed pretty well in a couple of Turing test-like competitions. At the same time, we would have to conclude that fictional AIs, such as HAL 9000, who has been mentioned before, or C-3PO from Star Wars, if they existed, would outperform us humans as far as linguistic competence is concerned. C-3PO, for instance, speaks thousands of languages, and no human speaker, of course, is able to do that. Now, the next question: how does GPT-3 compare to human speakers? Does it possess human-level linguistic competence? And many people who interact with GPT-3 report that it feels like they are conversing with an actual person, with a real human being. However, in fact, most impressive demos of GPT-3 are cherry-picked. So that also relates to what Michael was saying before. There's a lot of cherry-picking going on whenever there's something released. So GPT-3's output does not always seem to be super convincing and human-like. In other words, GPT-3 is not always super reliable when it comes to producing meaningful text or meaningful contributions to our linguistic practices. Thus, it is fair to say, in my opinion, that GPT-3 does not possess human-level linguistic competence, but still, I think it's still somewhat impressive what it can do in terms of producing text. So in the last few minutes, I would like to touch on some of the implications the proposed Wittgenstein-inspired account of linguistic competence has for AI research. Many people in the field seem to believe that we require a complete understanding of the human brain and that we must be able to imitate neural processes in order to be able to build general artificial intelligence, or more specifically, chatbots with human-level linguistic abilities. Searle, unsurprisingly, holds that view, and Jeff Hawkins, in his most recent book, points in a similar direction, and many, many other AI researchers seem to hold similar views. Yet, I think we shouldn't be too dogmatic about that. We shouldn't be too neurocentric, because according to the practice-based account of human-machine communication, we can also legitimately ascribe human-level linguistic competence to a machine if it exhibits human-level linguistic behavior, no matter if the machine's internal mechanisms resemble that of the human brain. Wittgenstein writes, to imagine a language means to imagine a form of life, because all of our language games are embedded in the human form of life. So in order to be able to fully participate in our human language games, machines have to be immersed in our human form of life. Thus, the conclusion we can draw is slogan like immersion over imitation. We should prioritize immersing AI systems into the human form of life over the attempt to fully imitate the human brain and its neural structures. This does by no means render neuroscience irrelevant. If there are any neuroscientists here in the chat room, no worries. A better understanding of the brain can definitely help us to develop new methods in AI and machine learning, and help us to also improve existing ones. However, we should not only focus on the brain and neural processes, and neglect all the other aspects of the human form of life in which our language games are embedded. And of course, this also leads to some other questions. For example, what is the role embodiment, consciousness, and creativity play in all this? And then, of course, the question how to immerse AI in the human form of life. So if you have any recommendations in that regard, I would be happy to hear about that. And we can also discuss these questions now, and also maybe selfhood, because Schulz von Thun seems to highlight the self, as Michael showed in his presentation. Maybe we can talk about some of these relations now. Here are the references. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you so much, Jonas, for your talk. I'm gonna clap too virtually. And while waiting for questions on your talk, I would like to ask one myself, maybe. You've quoted Searle, and I remembered a discussion between Searle and Marvin Minsky, where Minsky said something like, from a functionalist point of view, opposing the substantialist point of view of Searle's. He said something like, I really can't see why he is so objected to the idea that a big pile of junk can have feelings like ours. And I was wondering if, feelings are not speech, but the substantialist versus functionalist viewpoint structure is the same in the end. And I was wondering if you said practice-based approaches, if those are in some way maybe functionalist approaches, saying that you don't need a substance, but as long as you can transfer all the functions to a functional equivalent, then in the end you have the same outcome, and then in the end you can say this machine speaks because it does from a functionalist or from a practice-based point of view.
Yeah, there are definitely parallels with functionalism. And I mean, it's obviously I've drawn Wittgenstein and he's an anti-metaphysician, as it were. So it's also decidedly anti-metaphysic, the approach I outline. And yeah, doesn't really draw on only essences, as it were. It's anti-essentialist too, exactly. So I mean, feelings is a different approach, but I think Wittgenstein has also interesting things to say about that, because we need auto-created criteria for inner events. That's what Wittgenstein says, and that seems to point in a similar direction, right, to what you just said. Does it answer your question?
I don't even know if I asked the question, but
Oh, okay.
it does. And I was also I want to throw that in because you were saying immersion of AI, and I thought about a researcher. Her name is Janelle Shane. I can post that in the chat too.
Yes.
And she has a blog called AI Weirdness and works a lot with GPT-3 models in a very humoristic, immersive kind of way. So that's a tip recommendation for everyone.
Thanks. I really enjoy your work. It's great. Yeah. Also with the colors, and AI defines colors. So that's super interesting stuff.
I'm wondering, Michael, is your hand up still from the last session, or is it a new question for now? Then
new question. Thank you so much. I'm sorry, but I want to thank Jonas to give a much needed counterweight to my rant, to my brief rant in my presentation. But I want to point just two comments, or maybe a comment and a question. One comment: you showed the article, and the article, the Guardian article, I consider for me triggered a lot of irateness, because the headline is actually a lie. And if you go closer into the article, and the Guardian people were challenged out about this headline, they started backtracking a little bit, but they refused to reveal what actually went on into this article. This article was not written by an AI. It was they took eight texts or 8 outputs of GPT-3 and handpicked them and put them together. And this was all done in completely obscureness, done by people, by undergraduate students who revealed himself as a fan of the company. It's a deeply unethical reporting in my view. And this was also my interjections about. I'm not saying, for God's sake, I don't want to censor talk about GPT-3, but as far as I know, is to get access to the original model of GPT-3, you had to sign an NDA or to sign that you talk in a certain way about the model, and you refrain to talk in other ways. And this is where, when we talk about academic research, crosses a red line for me, because everything, the anecdotes that we see on Twitter by some people from business or celebrities who got access to it, that's fine. But if a researcher doesn't disclose that they're not free to talk about their object of research, that's, in that sense, I said, we should not talk about GPT-3, but we should talk about GPT-3 with a disclaimer, or say, I got a GPT-3-like model from an open source approach that people try to recreate it, but we cannot talk about GPT-3 just without a footnote. That was my remark, and I would like to hear your opinion on that.
Yeah, thank you very much for clarifying and all this and pointing to all these issues. I mean, I I even didn't know that what was happening in the background as far as the Guardian article is concerned. So, and also I don't have access. I think somebody asked that in the I don't have access to it. So I wasn't aware that there are these kinds of restrictions, but that's definitely very helpful to hear from you, and I thank you very much for highlighting that.
So I would suggest maybe if there's one more question that is very short and won't take more than 4 minutes to answer, we will take that. And if not, then we'll have a short break to give everyone the opportunity to walk around a little and then come back for the keynote. But does someone have another quick question? Hendrik, you do.
Yeah, as is my habit, like I'm happy to ruin everybody's break for another question. So I was just wondering, and maybe I just missed it for a second, if speech acts and the imitation of speech acts is relevant here, because the kind of to also kind of close out the symposium a little bit, the idea of do robots talk was not to ask, do robots produce speech, but actually do they perform in a context that we would recognize as actually talking? So do their utterances carry any kind of weight if we know that they are coming from a machine? And I was just wondering if that is factoring in your approach, because language games, of course, are usually determined by certain speech acts or types of speech acts, and how that fits into that. But maybe you have said that before and I just missed it for a second, sorry.
Is it about responsibility? Who's responsible for the utterance?
Yeah, well, sure, why not? Let's make it about that. I find that interesting as well. So yes, if I follow a machine's convincing speech act, even though there's certainly no intention behind it, do the machine does actually perform a speech act, or is that a misascription from my side? And should we understand it on a more functioning level, as Annette Zimmermann in the Daily News part framed it as, everything we can do with words, we can do with algorithms, that there seems to be still some sort of mismatch. And since you're defending GPT-3 here, just curious.
I'm not defending GPT-3 in particular. More like I think we should be open when it comes to linguistic competence and machines. But I think selfhood. I mean, I think we need some personhood or selfhood. I mean, because I mean, of course, maybe the more helpful question is: can we ascribe human level linguistic competence to a machine without a self, and therefore without moral responsibility or the capability to be morally responsible? So, and I think we are not yet there, and there are no machines around that have a self or have consciousness and can be responsible in any meaningful way. So does it answer your question? I think it is more like a holistic perspective, but when I mean, I think linguistic competence comes in degrees, but for full human level linguistic competence, we need selfhood in the end, and maybe even consciousness, and then that seems to be a prerequisite for the ability to take responsibility.
Great. I was just curious. So if Jacqueline wants to intervene, by all means, but there's also another hand up, but I think we will be kicked out in a little bit.
Yeah, I just wanted to say that speech acts do not necessarily have to be linked to moral whatever or personhood, but you know, if you define a speech act by does it have consequences in the world, then if your chatbot calls the hairdresser and makes an appointment, then that would be a speech act. So there are different ways of defining that. And then there's Marinos with another question, and then we have to really stop.
Yeah, just Well, I have a suggestion and a question. The suggestion is that when you were talking about the mentalistic and the other objections to the AI being properly seen as speakers, there was another contrast there which I thought may be helpful for you to introduce, and it's that as the difference between language as being individualistic or being a social object, right? Because all the objections you looked at treated language as something individualistic inside the skull of particular speakers, whereas Wittgensteinian and lots of other approaches see languages as public objects, and it's worth highlighting that difference. And the more you see language as a public object, the more chance there is for less than perfectly competent speakers to play the role. You already talked about scales of linguistic competence. So when small children speak, right, they don't have full competence. Their competence is scaffolded by people around them. The public language people have a good way to describe that. The private language people who think it's all, not private language, the individual language people who think it's all idiolects, they work a little harder at this. Nonetheless, the idiolect approach is more popular. So that was a suggestion, just another contrast to introduce it. I had a question. The issue is you're talking about Wittgenstein, but you're not talking about the slab game or any other game, right? You talked about the chimpanzees making marks in the line, but Wittgenstein starts the investigations with a few examples like a grocer counting out apples, and he talks about on the first page, two workers, they say slab and one hands him a slab. GPT-3 isn't even attempting that yet, right? Like these AIs don't have any way to influence the world directly. Nobody's yet put them in, not GPT-3 anyway. And it's hard to know how it would get into that game. And because it's not doing these embodied games, it just doesn't seem to be at all in the kind of game that you're talking about. So I was surprised not to hear that. Do you have something to say on that?
First, thanks regarding the first remark. Thanks. I could have also taken Wittgenstein's private language argument, but I chose his rule-following arguments, but they're interconnected, definitely. And I chose the chimpanzee example to highlight Wittgenstein's anti-anthropocentric views. And yeah, I mean, that was some of the issues I raised on the last slide, embodiment. And I also think that embodiment is really important for a machine or to truly participate in all of our language games. And otherwise, they can just participate in a limited number of language games in which action doesn't really play that much of a role, right? And physical interaction. But I mean, a robot, we could build robots in the future maybe who will have all that, have a body and have like senses. And so I think it's not conceptually impossible to have like to think a machine performing in the builder's game and on the first few pages on the philosophical investigations. So I think it's not conceptually impossible to have a robot instead of a human being in Wittgenstein's thought experiments on the first few pages on philosophical investigations. Of course, we don't have such robots, but I also highlighted that I don't think we have already robots or machines or systems with human level or human-like linguistic abilities. Does it answer your question?
I think it's interesting when we look at when people do use these kinds of systems to do tasks like Watson, like even the thing that answers Jeopardy questions, right? That looks like a move in a game, but it's not. It's a really interesting stochastically driven search engine, but Watson's not answering a question. Watson's making predictive text, right? And it seems like there's other AIs which do better at this, but GPT-3 is not even trying to identify a slab to hand it to me, right? If I ask for a slab, it doesn't have a conception of the game. I mentioned in the previous talk, it doesn't seem to have an interpretation in the way linguists talk about interpretations. And I don't know how you even get to talk about Wittgensteinian language games without having this engagement in concrete interpretations and playing a role in a game.
But I think there's a rich diversity of language games, and the one you mentioned is just one example. And I think AIs can participate in some, but not all language games we play, right?
I agree, but that's why I bring up Watson and answering the Jeopardy one, because there the moves of the games are strings of text, but Watson's not playing Jeopardy, right? The Jeopardy questions are fed into Watson and it's doing predictive text, right? With making a prediction of what an answer to that looks like. It doesn't understand Jeopardy. It's not trying to understand Jeopardy. It's not interpreting the situation at all. Whereas any Wittgensteinian game, right? People are in a situation and there's something that counts as a move as a game, and people try to make a move in the game. So other AIs are doing more of this, but I'm surprised. Yeah, GPT-3 seems to be the kind of AI which does the least of this. And I thought that was worth discussing.
Please correct me if I misinterpret your remark. Wittgenstein wouldn't say that we need an interpretation of SLAT, for instance, or of any word to be able to participate in a language game. Interpretations don't fix meaning, as he says, or mental representations don't.
Sorry, I'm not talking about interpretation in that sense. I'm talking interpretation where you have a model where the items in the model map onto objects in some domain, normally the domain of concrete objects, but mathematical domains, whatever, but that sense of interpretation, where the tokens mean something, and GPT-3 doesn't have those. It's not trying to have those.
Yeah.
Thanks, Marinos, for the discussion. And I agree with you, actually. And I would like to have Jonas answer, but we need to let people go and join the keynote, which will start in 2 minutes. So thank you all very much for joining, for presenting, for discussing, and I hope to see you somewhere else again. I'm sure there will be ways to contact each other if you're interested in discussing further.
We are all members of the AISB now. It's should be the easiest way of staying in touch. Yes, from my side as well. Thank you very much for participating. To Jacqueline for sharing the other half, and see you guys around.
Yeah.